Great shot. Great shot. Great shot. Danke.
Did he ever ask you to wear an outfit like that?
No.
Did he ever use phrases with you that you're the ultimate slut in bed?
No.
And did he talk to you about blowing enormous loads every time?
No.
Did he ever ejaculate on your face?
No.
Did he ever call you a whore,
No.
a slut,
No.
a three-hole wonder?
No.
Did he ever tell you how he wanted to tie you to a tree and, quote, put it in your ass?
No.
Must have had a different relationship that he did with Miss.
I gotta uninstall the old one, but I have two. There's like two sim links. One is pointing to the old version of this thing, and it doesn't work, so probably should get rid of it. All right, it made me update, relaunch. Okay, should be good now. All right, testing. Somebody say hello, please.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, you guys ready? We'll get started.
Go for it.
All right, 1, 2, and 3. Welcome back to the show. We have a very special guest tonight to talk about the events that happened last year in Asheville and the surrounding areas of the Carolinas with the big hurricane. And our guest tonight is Lamprey from, I'll let him explain his show and stuff, but he wrote an article recently about the hurricane, what happened in Asheville specifically, and we thought we'd dive into it. It's interesting, for me at least, to see that this is kind of back in the news a little bit at least, especially after the whole fire situation in California stole the natural disaster headspace of the country. But last year I remember this happening, and it was pretty crazy. And it was crazy in the sense that I had to find out about it from people telling me about it, because it seemed like the news was covering it up. And I think with Trump back in, he kind of wanted to give people a little bit of due attention in that part of the country. So it's sort of back in the conversation again. But it was very, very strange how that whole thing was done in terms of the rescue efforts and the relief efforts. And so we'll dive into it. But welcome, Lamprey, joined by my co-host Hans as well. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on. We've done a couple shows. You've been on my channel. I host MGTOW Chats over on YouTube, and I've written quite a bit over at the American Sun. It was my first article I've done in a couple years. And I spent 2 years in Asheville. I moved down there during COVID. I was from New York. With everything going on in New York City, on my job was kind of on the rocks. So I decided to go move down there. My mother had lived down there for about 10 years now. She retired with a pension, being a school teacher. My brother relocated shortly thereafter. So given the direction of New York City, not knowing what was going to happen with the economy, the lockdown, so on and so forth, I was like, you know what? Life's short. Everything that I was striving for and motivated to do was just eviscerated overnight. So went down there. It was fairly easy to find a job, given, coming from a mega city, you have a lot of experiences and, a lot of different technical aspects of things about your job. Was able to find a job relatively easy. And I knew it wasn't necessarily a place for me, given the political landscape of the city and a little bit of its periphery. It's kind of a blend of, Appalachian, I guess people would think like they're hillbillies or whatever, Bible thumpers, so on and so forth. That's somewhat on the periphery, but Asheville itself is very progressive. It's far left. It did the whole St. Floyd thing, which I'll definitely get into. And I was very much out of place. And coming from me to say something like that, I lived in Asia for 4.5 years. I felt more isolated and depersonalized, to say the least, living in a place like that versus a foreign country.
That's quite amazing. Is it just the culture is different? The size of the town is smaller, or the location is so remote? What do you think made you feel isolated?
Well, in the article, I kind of got lost in the weeds on the concept of transplants and people kind of just, passing through. So people that you would get to know, befriend, work with, so on and so forth, they're all from someplace else. They're not actually from Asheville. Very few people that live in the city of Asheville and Buncombe County, because that's the county that is the city of Asheville resides in. It's it's people from all walks of life. It's 80% white. Um, Again, politically, it very, like, man, I have to really think about how I put these into words and talking about it on the show, but uh, they're here, they're one day, gone tomorrow. So a lot of my friends and people that I got acquainted with, you build up some type of relationship with them, and then they're gone, and you just never hear from them again. You just keep in touch through social media or whatever.
So you're like vacation buddies. It's like people you meet on the beach or something like that.
Yeah, right. Great place to visit, not a great place to live. And I'm not knocking Asheville. I want to, like, put a side note, like, me having this conversation with you guys. I lived there. There was parts about it that I did enjoy. The free spirit nature, keep Asheville weird, all that about it was really cool. But within a few months of me moving there, generally speaking, everyone else thought it was a great idea to relocate. And with the explosion of people working from home and remote work, just put your job in a backpack and, kind of just, I guess, couch surf your job. That's kind of what started really taking off while I was there. And it really
Right.
caused a lot of disharmony amongst people that lived in Asheville for about 10 years, and more so for the people who lived on its periphery, which would be, the native Appalachian population.
Do they? This is a very ignorant statement on my part, but I've known people from Appalachia, so this is not completely insane. But do they have an accent? I can't think of one, but like, is there a distinct, like, vocal difference between the people
Oh
that
yeah.
visit from? Okay, so how do you distinguish that? I mean, can you
How do
do
I
the
distinguish
twang?
the people that from Asheville
What is
versus
the what is it like? Is it a Southern accent? Like, what is the
it's
accent
a more
similar to?
refined Southern accent. So if you think like accents of like Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, a much more cleaner, more polished version of that. A little
Okay,
bit more a little more eloquent, I want to say, even though they're not necessarily eloquent people, but it's more pleasant sounding versus what you would think of someone from Louisiana speaking, or Arkansas.
gotcha. Okay, and so that is a quick, I guess the term shibboleth might apply, way to distinguish between the locals versus the transplants. Is that one way?
That, and honestly speaking, the way they look. So like people that are
Hmm.
from, so let's before I get too lost into this, when I mean, I'm going to say Appalachian people. So when I say Appalachian people, I mean people that have lived in North Carolina their entire lives. They can trace their ancestors, so on and so forth. Civil War, blah blah blah. Use your imagination, right? Then there's people that live in Asheville who I would call the transplants, or they're also the term called halfbacks, which are boomers that retired, moved to Florida, realized Florida is too humid, and they wound up moving to a place like Asheville, North Carolina. And again, it's periphery: Greenville, South Carolina, Spartanburg, so on and so forth. So the people that are natives of North Carolina have been dislocated and pushed out onto its periphery. And that's it kind of been exasperated during COVID. It's been ongoing for about 20 years now, but again, the doors were just blown wide open around 2020. And again, with the explosion of people that are retiring, looking for a cheaper life, and looking for some type of halfway point, you have this explosion of people relocating to a place like Asheville.
Yeah,
How many
I've go ahead.
or
Big
what
on.
is the average age of the people you encountered down there?
The average age of Asheville, North Carolina is 41 years old, and North Carolina's average age is 39 years old.
Oh,
The
Interesting.
the what I now that's on paper. Again, this is government statistics. From what I see, it's either senescent 60 plus year olds or people that are under like 35 just trying to get by one day at a time.
Interesting. And were a lot of them specifically from like the U.S. Northeast corridor? Were the Mid-Atlantic, or are there a lot of Southerners who are retiring in Nashville? Where's a lot of this influx coming
I
from?
would say Midwest, like Michigan, Ohio,
Really?
Illinois. Yeah, those were what I encountered mostly. A good portion of New Yorkers. New Yorkers originally, like the first wave of people leaving New York had already happened about 20-25 years ago, and they moved to more like towards Raleigh and Durham during the whole tech explosion, with the dot-com bubble.
Yeah.
So
seems like a
those
lot of people went to Tennessee from New York. Is that about right, or the conservatives at least?
Yeah, but again, it's mostly older people,
Okay.
and for the younger demographic, what had happened was people that for the younger people, they relocated to these places trying to find themselves and trying to carve out some type of normalcy, whatever their definition of normalcy is, in a place like again, Tennessee, parts of Tennessee, that whole region over there, because again, it's affordable. You were able to afford a home. You're not necessarily monetary motivated. You're not economically driven. You just want to be okay with just living a simple life. It's not the whole you got to work it, you got to push it. It's not that's not the energy that you necessarily find in these parts, because listen, stereotypes are true, and the whole fabric of the South and that part of the United States, it's more laid back, and people from the North were kind of looking for something like that, especially during COVID. Regardless of what their political leanings were, even myself, I'm like, you know what? I'm done. Let me just buy a condo, and I have a small mortgage payment. I have a simple job, and that's it. I'm good with this. I have some free time to go disc golfing, go kayaking, trying to make some friends, kick back, smoke some weed, drink a few beers brewed locally, and that was it. Unfortunately, just because you move to another relocation doesn't mean you're going to change yourself so easily. A lot of those things take a lot of time and different you know, you have to work on your own mindset, basically. And a lot of people bring their own problems from those states and those locations to a place like Asheville. And again, really causing issues with communicating with people, man. My biggest problem living down there was I was actually worried about how others perceived me. And listen, I live in New York City, dude. Like, I got people, I think I deal with 52 ethnic groups on a daily basis, and people love me. Like, I get along with everyone. And no one, and maybe just because they're from another country, they don't necessarily know how to perceive you per se, because you're American, but all Americans are different. I guess that's just how Americans act. So they don't really question who you are, or question your motivations. They just take it at face value. And as long as you're not screwing me over, I really don't care, because I have my own life to live. In a place like Asheville, because of that free time and just the way, just a general sense of boredom, and that people kind of like perceive you differently and really question your motivations, and what do you mean by that, what is that supposed to mean. That's basically because everyone's from a different place within the United States, and you will speak English. So that I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but that was the biggest crux of my issue living down there, was dealing actually with other Americans, other white Americans for that matter, and the way others treated one another was very concerning for me. Just really just shitting on people is really bad, man.
Well, I guess I'm trying to figure this out, and we all project from our own experiences, usually as the first pass to understand something. But based on your description, this place seems extremely strange. Like you've got obviously the historical heritage population from whatever brought them there to begin with. I don't really know. I'm assuming somewhat agricultural or resource
Agriculture and
based.
coal mining.
Right. Okay. Then, and I'm going to read from your article because I think it's helpful. So its inhabitants are trust fund hippies, smug liberal boomers, drug addicts, nomads, politically fringe, non-aggression principle types, libertarians, I guess, those from poor, blue-collar, broken homes, and of course, lots and lots of lesbians. So I'm just picturing like Portland
Yes.
on the Swanopia. How do you say that?
Swananowhere River.
Swananoa. Okay. So it just sounds like Portland. And Portland is I don't know, I'm sure at least somebody on this podcast besides me has seen the show Portlandia, but the opening of that show was Portland, where young people go to retire. And that always confused the hell out of me because watching the show and visiting Portland a couple times, it's obviously an exaggeration. There's actually like people who work for a living there, like they have Nike and Intel sort of, while that thing burns to the ground in the meantime. But it's still like they've got factories and stuff. So there's still some industry, but the whole dream of Portland is, yeah, you could work in a coffee shop and get up at 11 a.m. every day. I never understood how that's sustainable. Like if everybody in the world did that, nobody would make the roofing tiles. Nobody would be a construction worker. Nobody would build a car. Nobody would do accounting. I mean, there's like actual stuff that needs to be done. And all these like, easygoing service jobs, there's need for that, but it's not 100% of the economy. So I don't understand how that works sustainably. And it seems like it would require a patron class of maybe like really rich computer programmers or something, like paying for all this stuff, who also live there but get effectively export dollars from their trade. And so I don't know who's secretly funding all this. Maybe it's the trust funds, maybe it's the retirees, but it just seems like a very strange makeup for a sustainable civilization or community. And add in the mix of COVID transplants and then people probably getting disillusioned and leaving. And then you add in the hurricane. This place seems like a completely discordant society. It seems very strange. And Portland's got the benefit.
It's a watered down Portland. It's an East Coast version of Portland. That's a very good way of summarizing what Asheville is.
What is the population? I profess ignorance on this, but how big is it actually?
It's about 100,000.
Okay, that's not tiny, but it's not big either. So, and then geographically speaking, is it spread out or is it concentrated?
Yeah, I'll give you here. I wrote down some quick notes here. 2022's population is 93,776. That is a 36% increase from the year 2000. It is 77% white, a little bit shy of 8% black, 7% Hispanic, and then mystery meat for the rest of the numbers. Percentage of living in poverty was 14.8. Median gross rent in 2022 was $1,300. Median house value in 2022 was $410,000. It was $105,000 in the year 2000. The average in the state of North Carolina is $280,600. Estimated median household income was about $65,000. It's $4,000 less than North Carolina, and its crime is double that of the average in the rest of the United States.
So when you were there, did you feel like it was a place not set up for 100,000, or do you feel as though the scale of what was laid out for the city actually made sense for that population?
It cannot hold it. Still cannot hold. The infrastructure cannot keep up with the demand of people moving there. And there's more takers than there are givers in that county and in that region. And what I mean by that is, if like I said, my mother, retired pensioner, 75 years old, relocates there. She's taking her money from another state, moving it down there and just buying, right? But not actually contributing, meaning by working. And when they do work, it's again in the service industry, which Adam was pointing out.
And things like utilities, the roads, just in your kind of anecdotal experience down there, were they functional? Were they
Yes.
sort of really? And so were
Yeah,
they
roads are phenomenal in North Carolina.
really?
For anyone that knows North Carolina, its highway system is fantastic. Roads are paved. The drainage is really good. The Duke Energy is the electricity provider. They do a really good job. But again, these are things that are run by people that are from North Carolina. They're not people that are from Illinois and is transgender. And it's not how it works. So the people that live in Asheville are all these, again, the air quote woke, just again, use your imagination what I mean by woke. Those people are just strung out. They have psychological issues. And, they don't really fit into society one way or another. And they're not contributing. The city is heavily dependent on the people that have been born and raised in North Carolina.
What do all the lesbians do?
Dude, arts and crafts,
That
refrigerator
sounds about right.
artist. Yeah, dude, it's coffee shop barista. Daddy gave her, a down payment for a small business loan. She sets up some type of Pilates studio, doggy daycare.
Yeah.
Lesbians are on an island with short-term goals, and I quote Christopher Lash when I say that.
If lesbians
because-
were on an island, they'd starve to death. I mean, I met.
yes.
I bought some sawhorses from some lesbians once. It was they were nice to me. It was fine, but it was the funniest thing because these these were like the most like Beetlejuice looking designed sawhorses I've ever seen. Like a nail would be sticking out the side, like it wouldn't be level. Like one leg was longer than the other ones. The board would be going the wrong way. One was using screws, and then they decided to switch to nails. So I bought some sawhorses, and I learned a little bit about lesbians. And it wasn't clear to me what they did, but it seemed like they were artists. They had like this house. This is all Craigslist, so who knows who these people are. But again, nothing against them. They were very friendly, and I got I guess a good deal for some.
These lesbians are not friendly.
Sawhorses.
These are not friendly lesbians.
Well,
These
they wanted to make the sale, so you never know.
Right,
but,
right.
Could have just been salesmanship. But I just found it hilarious. Like they're craftswoman, or do they want to be men? I don't know. Craftsmanship was a little lacking, and I thought, well, I don't know. Like how like the gay brain, like I realize I probably sound a little ignorant now to some, but the gay guy, right? He's got like this sort of male brain, but a little feminized, and then the woman lesbian, she's got the female brain, but slightly masculinized. So it's fascinating to me to see how it actually plays out in practice. So sorry, little
that's good, man.
of my life. So a lot of that up there as well.
Do you feel like the municipal officials, the city officials, run the place well? I mean, the lesbians and the transients, outstanding. Is it run well? Is it that little area? Is it kind of functional? Or there are a lot of weird problems? Or
no, it's very corrupt actually. I tried writing down as many scandals as I could in preparations for this show, but there are numerous scandals regarding city officials taking kickbacks and bribes from developers and such, and trying to it's bad. I'm trying to what did I write down here?
Well, how's it compared to New York? You've got some experience with that.
Well, here's the thing. New York has 7 million people. We're talking 7 million people versus 100,000. So if I were to actually extrapolate this in statistics forms, you'll see that this is far more corrupt than New York City. You had there's one where the deputy commissioner for the Asheville police, he's wanted on some type of human trafficking case.
Whoa.
There's yeah, no, seriously, you can look that one up. County commissioner, conspiracy to commit fraud for some type of federal program. There's the Wanda Green scandal, which is ongoing, which is again kickbacks and bribes from a general contractor. So there's a lot of that going on. And the thing with Asheville, which is everyone should know, it's tourist driven, heavily dependent on tourism. So the corruption and the scandals and the crime tends to get brushed under the rug to not scare tourism away from the area. Because you've actually take a look at some of the crimes that are committed in Buncombe County, it's horrifying. Like some really sick, heinous crimes go on in that area. Again, because of the progressivism, you're getting many criminals gravitate towards this location, knowing that they can get away with whatever.
Are we
And
talking about like break-ins or car, theft? Like what's the crime exactly?
Well, so because it's the Diet Portland, they have the whole ABCAB, whatever, all cops are bad, whatever you want to call it. I forgot. I can't remember the term because it's been like 4 or 5 years. But they initiated the defund police. And I have a list here. So here
Okay.
the crime rate is per 1,000 residents. Violent crimes 9, property 44. So for 1,000 residents, the crime
Yeah.
is 53 to every 1,000 residents. So
It seems
here,
high. I don't know what the national average is though for that.
theft under $1,000 is no longer being enforced. Theft from vehicles, minimal damage or graffiti, non-life-threatening harassment.
Well, okay, just anecdotally,
Yeah.
what did you see? Did you notice it? Did you have anything stolen? Did you see something like a window smashed or anything like that? Like what did you notice?
I didn't necessarily notice anything like me being involved in any type of crime or anything like that. No, nothing out of the norm. No.
All right.
But they defunded the police, and the Asheville Police Department is having kind of like a morale crisis.
Sure.
So a lot of people have left the police force during the St. Floyd situation, and they're not able to retain anybody. Everyone keeps leaving. They find a better city where it's a little bit more, easier on cops with enforcing the law. And on top of that all, anyone that works in the public sector in North Carolina doesn't get paid all that much.
so where are these people going? The people who have been frustrated with Asheville or Western North Carolina, the locals who are are they just getting pushed further out, deeper into Western North Carolina, or are they? So where are some of these towns? What are they called for people who aren't familiar with the area?
A popular adjacent city and county is Henderson County, where that guy Hathorne, the politician that was in the wheelchair. Do you guys remember him?
Maybe.
Hathorne? Young
Maybe.
guy, blonde, called his adversary a simp. And
Oh, yes. Well, the guy who alleged that the Republican Party was full of old gay dudes that tried to get him in an orgy.
Yep.
And then he was fired,
accurate.
then he lost the election a month later. Yeah. That guy.
Yeah, so he represented the district right below Buncombe County, and that is has a much older population. It's just as expensive as Asheville, so people are being pushed further and further out deeper into the periphery, where again, people that have accents and have lived there their entire lives. People that are strung out on fentanyl live in these areas, and these areas experience their own kind of crime, but it's underreported. It doesn't
And we're
get
talking
reported at
about
all.
sort of the old stock Scotch Irish
Correct.
Appalachia, like the
Yes.
real Appalachia that goes back to the 17th century, effectively. These are
Right.
the descendants of the area.
So you get some progressive, Karen, who's bisexual, and she probably divorced, made out what a shit ton of money from the divorce, and just buys a home double the value of the median house in the area, driving up property values and pushing people in further and further out. But while they're pushing people further and further out, the people that actually work in like these business corridors and these business sectors, now they have to travel 40-50 minutes out to get to work, which is no different than living in a place like New York City or Chicago, or that's the norm. At least in New York or in like Los Angeles, it's how much money you're making. It's kind of worth the hour drive into work. In a place like North Carolina, it's not worth it because you're living, paycheck to paycheck.
I want to
Okay.
go back really quick, and then I'll let you ask.
Yeah, go,
Adam.
please.
go back really quick to the municipal corruption you were talking about. So what is the oldest date of these stories that you have, or maybe the ones you rattled off, but the stories
5
you have in front
years.
of you? So is there a general pattern where maybe 5 years ago there was suddenly a higher increase in corruption? Or do you think it was
Again,
being
this is
reported more?
my assumption. My assumption is that things get done down south differently.
Yeah,
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Things are different down here, boy.
Yeah.
You see,
Yeah.
so there's corruption. We just don't talk about it.
yeah,
So, like the cops, for example, in counties nearby, they're the law, right? So, and who you gonna go and tell? My brother, my pa? Like you're not gonna get away with it with a place like in Asheville because everyone's from somewhere else, and you kind of couple that with the whole defund the police. So there's a much more watchful eye on things like that, and that's why you're seeing more of this come to light. What I think, and that me and my brother were kind of talking to some locals about why there's so many hotels, because there's an obscene amount of hotels in Asheville, say the city of Asheville, and again anything within a arm's length reach of the downtown.
Well, it's
And
tourism, right?
right, but there's not that much tourism to warrant so many hotels. And
Huh.
we were trying to talk to some locals about how corruption is in New York. Like, we were like, yeah, there's obviously some type of money laundering scheme going on here in hotels. And dude, like, you could hear a pin drop when we were talking about this to the people. Like, oh, dude, did I touch a third rail? I'm sorry. This is like kind of the norm where I'm from. Like, it's kind of out in the open that, yeah, this is money laundering. What's happening with these
Okay, I gotta
restaurants and
ask,
hotels
since you
going
brought
on.
it
Go
up,
on. Yeah.
how much of Atlantic City is money laundering?
I have no idea, dude. That I
It just
wouldn't
seems like it would be very good for that because of all the cash.
know. New York City, I mean, digressing for a point, New York City, it's all money laundering for Chinese, and some fucking half-ass tycoon from Iran buying up, 4 or 5
Yeah, that's
units
the
in
real
some
estate.
high-rise. Yeah.
But
That's
to
the
your
real
point,
estate.
to your point, people in New York are infamous for being very blunt and are very open about the city's problems. There's a history of even the criminals in New York being very open about being criminals. Um, Flashy characters like John Gotti were very much like this, just openly admitted to it.
Hmm.
Um, you're saying that in places like West North Carolina, it is
We don't
completely
talk about that.
diametrically different, like
We don't
completely
talk
different.
about these things down
I
here.
got you.
We're
I
good
got you.
Christians.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I was
that's
about to say,
yeah.
because the Christian culture, and I'm not knocking Christians, okay, just to be clear here, but what I've noticed in dealing with Mormons, for example, is that they're very cagey about talking about things that might be construed as slightly corrupt
Untoward.
or veering towards bribery.
Yeah.
They will beat around the bush quite a bit because they have this moral, you can call it a conscience, but it bothers them to some degree. Whereas, I guess in tougher places like the mean streets of Manhattan, I guess they're proud of it, I guess.
Their assholes clench when you talk about things like this, especially the more the Baptist types.
Mhm.
Their assholes clench when you talk about like some type of scandal or kickback, nepotism, so on and so forth. Because for them, it's just this. It's family. It's my neighbor. It's in New York, it's just part of doing business. Down there, because there's some type of moral appendage to it, they tend to like, oh, they get a little butt hurt. And also you in like again the transplants, um they're totally daft to all these type of things. Everything's utopia, everything's beautiful. That can't happen here. Black people can be airline pilots, so on and so forth. So there's again this parallel moral philosophy between the people that the transplants, the progressive types, woke, so on and so forth, alphabet soup. They're just kind of just aloof to these type of things, or just naive, just brutally naive to the way things get done, and then it's quite cutthroat the higher and higher up you go up in the pendulum as far as wealth is concerned in that area.
Quick question, just to frame this in my mind. Is Asheville built up already, or is there a lot of construction?
Oh, there's tons of construction, man.
Okay, so the
Total
reason I asked that,
ecological destruction. I mean, they're just blowing mountaintops off to build some hunky dory HOA. It sucks, man. It's really sad what's happening to the area.
okay, and I can understand that, but reason I asked that is I've noticed that in kind of small-ish historically towns where there is a demand to relocate there, where the locals are being pushed out, just as you described, because like they used to be, in agriculture or something, and there wasn't a lot of money historically.
Yep.
And so their parents didn't save that much, and they have like this 2-bedroom house, but it's on like 5 acres, and so it's kind of cool. But they're tempted to subdivide and sell it, and it's kind of like I use the parable, eating your own seed corn. It's not sustainable long term, but in the medium and short term, there's a lot of money and jobs to be had by the locals in construction and real estate. And I'm wondering if that keeps the locals still somewhat receptive to these transplants, because they are effectively being paid by them. They're being hired by these people for now. But until everything is built up, and I don't know where these guys go after that. But I think about that stuff a lot, because I see it in these little towns that start getting hot. The locals are kind of like caught off guard, but if they work construction, they can kind of do okay. And then
It's funny. Let me interject. So it's funny you say that. So circling back to the whole Helene situation. So there's bids for projects to rebuild a lot of things that have been damaged during the hurricane, and a lot of these construction companies, good old boys, are actually balking at the contracts because they've had it with the whole political ethos of Asheville. I guess, and that's kind of because the pendulum has swung nationally with Trump back in office. Now these people feel like they have the upper hand, and they can also, because there's such a huge demand for these type of jobs, that these guys can pick and choose and say, no, we're not doing that. Rebuilding what, the LGBT community center? No, we're not. Go build it yourself now. So it's now come full. The pendulum has swung back in a lot of these progressives' face, asking locals to rebuild for them.
I have a sort of an odd question. You were there. Did you see a lot of new businesses start, including the lesbian doggy daycare and all that? Were there a lot of businesses starting?
They open and close, open and close.
Really?
Open and close. Yeah, when I was down there I was there around Thanksgiving time. I wanted to go to some bars and restaurants that I would frequent during COVID. They're boarded up. And COVID kind of not COVID, I'm sorry, the hurricane kind of kicked the stool out from underneath them, because they were operating on such thin margins, and it heavily dependent on tourists. So the hurricane hit peak tourist season, and if they don't have money coming in for those 3 or 4 month stretch, it's over for them.
So you knew that town
though.
before COVID, because your mom, right? Is that right?
Well, I didn't visit.
Okay.
I did not visit Asheville prior to COVID. I went down. I was there in October of 2020, and I left in October of 2022. So I was there in the thick of it all, between mask mandates and arm ticket Fauci ouchies.
One question I have: did you notice an inordinate amount of law firms, small law firms
Yes.
opening? You did.
Yes, there's a lot of attorneys. A lot of attorneys, a lot of real
What
estate
is
agents.
that? Like the John Grisham effect? I don't understand the whole Southern lawyer.
I'm getting there. So something that we have brought up on the show before is that in a lot of the metro areas and towns and cities that seem to be booming pre-COVID, and certainly after COVID, through the population transfers, there is an effervescence of small law firms and offices of big law firms in these places that come in very fast. And you're saying that did happen, and is happening in Asheville. Lots of law
100%.
firms.
I can't believe you said that. That's interesting. You know about that. That's really
What
cool.
do they do? I mean, is
Well,
Well,
it
I'll tell
all
you,
like a
man.
front? Or...
Dude, it's crazy. So obviously real estate is the big one. So closing attorneys, HOA attorneys, anything regarding municipality planning between the city and developers. So that's one major cohort, and also a lot of non-for-profit attorneys relocate to these areas because it's kind of like a sanctuary for them. So
well,
like,
that and there's a lot of pro bono law work that, like you said, the not for profit, but
yes,
specifically there is a lot of pro bono law work from basically for profit law firms, big law and small law firms. So this has happened specifically in several cities in the upper Pacific Northwest, let's say Montana, Wyoming. And these law firms, big law, sometimes out of San Francisco, out of New York, have been at the forefront, in particular, of the homeless issue.
yep.
And these are for profit law firms that open up arms in these places because they're booming. There's more people there, so they figure we're going to open up. And the first thing they often do is engage in pro bono work. And it's always for transients, homeless, and various other types. And it seems to trail any place that booms. There's a massive surge in pro bono law work. And if that's happening in Asheville, it seems to kind of highlight a specific trend. Nobody's really named this trend yet, but it is definitely happening. And it seems to be dovetailing with increases in municipal corruption, or at least reporting of municipal corruption. So something is clearly going on where place booms, law firms come in, suddenly there's lots of pro bono work for antisocial causes. Suddenly there's an increase in maybe in municipal corruption. There seems to just be some general pattern here. I don't know if it's related to purely just real estate, but there is something odd happening.
Is
And
this like
nobody,
some kind of shakedown, like
I
technique?
think it could be. I think it could be, but nobody has really given a name yet, or I think really someone needs to, I don't know, maybe Steve Saylor, if you're listening, set your mind to this. Something is clearly going on here, but nobody's really figured out
Well,
what the game is.
you mentioned the homeless, and it just sort of reminded me. I got into it on Twitter with this immigration attorney, and she was basically saying, "Oh, United States will collapse if we don't have H-1Bs." And I was basically pointing out the fact that, she's in for the taste while her neighbor loses their job, and everybody was ratioing her. But I have a very low opinion, generally speaking, of lawyers, and I find them to be parasitical for the most part, and completely unnecessary in a properly run society. If we had good citizens, you wouldn't really need them. Unfortunately, you don't, and so they sort of show up. They're basically like the the white collar version of a private militia, and they kind of go in and guns blazing, so to speak, metaphorically at least, and they don't really produce anything. And so I don't really like them. I sort of see a very tiny percentage of the economy needing something like that, but not much. And so whenever they set up shop, I see, well, that's one less steel mill we could have had. That's one less intelligent person doing something productive. So there's my rant on lawyers, but
Building
I'm very suspicious of these types.
so building upon what you just stated about these attorneys, again, these non-for-profit types or pro bono work, they use a place like Asheville as like a home base. And then
Yes.
they
Yeah.
they push their ideology and their causes, whatever causes they represent, into areas where, again, the natives live. So I made a point about Henderson County. Henderson County is very conservative, hardcore Republican, kind of, Mitt Romney type Republican. What do we call them? Conservative types. So those attorneys will start pushing into a place like Henderson County. Henderson County doesn't necessarily know how to react or adapt to these types. So they'll start setting up protests where like the whole the situation with abortion, and then they would start, be out there telling them this is where you can set up. They find chinks in the armor within the law of these conservative areas to push forward and push their ideology onto the areas that would be more right leaning.
Yeah, and we have to ask the question, who's paying for it? And we can make our list of suspects, right? It's these NGOs. This is reading something about U.S. aid today. It's basically just this front for funding a lot of these social progressive activism causes, like women's robotics in Afghanistan or something like that. But the equivalent domestically is happening, and we've all seen it. Well, we don't have enough representation and blah 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 group and blah 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 area, and so we have to break it up. And so, but who's paying for it, and where's the money coming from? I mean, these lawyers inherently don't produce anything. They don't make food. They don't build your house. They basically just talk for a living, and they waste your time. And so, somebody is actually funding their existence. So who is that? Is the big question.
You touched up on something that I wanted to discuss with the both of you. Asheville is one of the locations for Afghan resettlement.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, good Lord.
How long has that been going on?
When the Afghan pullout.
And how...
Can you imagine?
So you were there. You were there.
Take a step back and realize what I just said. We're talking about a place where there's lesbians and doggy daycare and transgenders, mentally unhinged transgenders walking around the streets, basically half naked. And this is a location that they feel would be appropriate for Afghan resettlement. And yes, I do. So go on. Sorry. What were you going to ask?
Well, so the Afghan pullout was in late 2021, October 2021. So you were there when the pullout happened. And you left in October of 2022, you said?
Yep.
So in that year, it was noticeable. They were bringing him in just rapid fire.
Yep. My brother got to work with one at a restaurant.
Are they living in those hotels that you thought were
I don't know
strangely
I do not know, but perhaps. But the funny thing is that my brother worked with one of them, and we're talking like not I don't say Taliban, but like the goat herder Afghan people, dude. Like these are these are not cosmopolitan Kabul, sipping Starbucks types. We're talking goat herder. You know what I mean? Like, they basically have baked bean teeth and, gnarled beards and shit. So my brother worked at a restaurant, a very progressive restaurant. And my brother noticed, everyone was kind of like perplexed by this individual, but, we got to be accepting, it was all inclusive. But my brother's, more of the old world type from New York. The guy didn't speak a word of English. He was washing dishes at this restaurant. My brother would nudge him over, look at that faggot over there, and they would chuckle and laugh and stuff about it. So my brother tried his best to get on his level a bit. The day my brother quit the job, he's leaving, and the interpreter for the kid comes over.
Just about to say, how do they speak English?
There's an interpreter or some type of caregiver. I don't know what you want. Again, it's some non-for-profit that shuttles them back and forth.
White woman. Who's the?
It was a dude. I think he was Afghani, but born in the United States. The interpreter. So the interpreter, it's dark out, and this Afghani calls him over, saying, "Hey, come here real quick. He wants to speak to you. I'm going to translate for you." And this is the last day my brother's working, and the Afghan refugee through the interpreter tells my brother that I want to thank you. You were my only friend here that I've met. Thank you for being cool with me, and basically saying all the half-assed jokes about the wokeness of the place was meant a lot to him. And then he said something Arabic, saying I'll blow up some shit for you if someone hurts you or something like that. So my brother was totally moved by it, and I was like that. So the only person that befriended this guy was someone making fun of making fun of the city and shit, you know?
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. It's just the joke about the Taliban was like we have more in common with them than we do with the average white.
Right, exactly.
It's so cruel to bring these people here. I mean, and I
It's
can't. I
cruel
mean,
on
that's
everyone.
it's cruel on everyone who's already here, but it is cruel to bring them here for their own sake. I mean, you're sort of transplanting them. You might as well just be taking them to Jupiter. I mean, it's cruel and unusual punishment. They probably would have been better off in a village in, the Helmand province, just dealing hashish or whatever it is they do out there. And like, this is just bizarre. I don't understand. What do the locals think of this? And what did they think of, bringing in a new refugee labor force or whatever?
Well, I can tell you in New York City, the problem now is that you have these guys from Africa. They speak French. They don't speak Spanish. They're from Cameroon and, like that
Molly.
region.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, and they don't look like African Americans. You could spot this dude from a mile away, being like, "That's not a regular black person that we're all used to seeing." They're like 6'5". They're really skinny, and they're setting up like a towel on a city sidewalk, trying to sell Nike knockoffs and AirPods, just trying to like get some semblance of like working and trying to make a living and trying to make something of themselves. And then here comes the cop and just takes his towel, and takes his shoes away, takes all this stuff, and tell him go back to where you came from, which is some hotel. So they leave during the day. They're shit kickers in
Go
the
back
Home
to where
Depot.
you came from,
Yeah,
the
whatever. They're in like
hotel.
some hotel or whatever in Brooklyn or some shit. That's kind of where they house them, or in the Bronx. Anyway, so the cops come and take their shit away, don't give it back to them, and tell them to go back to wherever they're housed, and rinse and repeat.
Those guys were there when I was in New York like 20 years ago. I'm not even kidding. It was like 20 years ago. And they still had that like black guy straight out of the heart of Africa, kind of like holding the stereotypical trench coat with all the watches. That's what you're describing, right? I mean, that's
Yeah, probably those have eventually got a medallion and are probably working Uber by now. But a lot of the new arrivals are just working Uber Eats, and again doing exactly what I just said, which is trying to just hustle and trying to make like $20 a day or whatever. It's really sad, man. It's crazy, and then the whole like the red tape for these people. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. Here's a monthly stipend of $1,000, and then it's kind of like a waiting game where, okay, am I going to be an American citizen? Can I get my working papers? So that's kind of what I've seen. What's even crazier is that these people from again, mostly Africa, even some parts of Asia, they're sticking them in like Hispanic neighborhoods where there's like these 4 foot nothing Guatemalans where you have absolutely nothing in common with. And the squats are looking at these guys like, what the hell did this person get here? And the Hispanics don't ever communicate with them. They don't buy anything from them, because the new arrivals don't know the lay of the land. So they just pick some spot on a map and like, let's hop on the train and go over here and try selling, I don't know, Pop Tarts and fucking knockoff Nikes or some shit. I have no idea, dude, but
What
it's
did Steve
crazy.
Saylor call this? He called this the Star Wars Cantina or something like that. I mean, this is
yeah,
like ridiculous. These people
Moss
might as well
Eisley.
just be from
Yeah.
different planets, and you're like forcing them to live together.
Right,
It's
and then you
it,
couple with the defunding the police, where
yeah,
justice isn't blind; it's just looking the other way. So no, you can't sell Nike phones, but you can go ahead and break into this BMW.
right, yeah.
All right. So
This is
let
great.
let's move the timeline to where you decided to leave. Maybe you can explain what prompted that, and then the hurricane.
I just felt like there wasn't as much money to be made down there as maybe some people would perceive. Like it wasn't moving at the pace I wanted it to. It's a right to work state, which I don't know enough to really get lost in the weeds on it, but
This means
people just don't
you
get
don't
paid
have to
that
join
much.
the union if you're in a factory.
Well, like their unions are like outright banned or something like that in these.
I don't know if they're banned, but they can't make it a union shop. In other words, if a union like in Michigan or something
There
has
you go, right?
control over the members at that factory, everyone has to be part of that. You can't choose not to. And
But-
in the South, they don't allow that requirement.
So the problem is with the rising cost of just everything. Wages have not kept up, which I made a note in the article. Again, the housing prices are astronomical in Western North Carolina right now. Even a place like Brevard, which I would love for your listeners to look up and see what the houses go for in that part of North Carolina, where again, there's really nothing there as far as jobs are concerned, but every house is like $600, $700, $800,000, second getaway homes, whatever it might be.
Right.
So it really came down just to work, and at the end of the day, the money's kind of still being made in New York. So I didn't really want to
Okay.
burn
I
any
remember
bridges in New
talking to
York.
you though about sort of how you felt, like culturally speaking, how you didn't feel comfortable. Is that part of it, or
That would
I mean,
probably more. I wasn't able to make any friends. Again, my friends would come
that's
and
huge.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be the biggest thing. Dating, the women down there are much more again, not driven by money. They're not driven by Instagram. So the women were far more pleasant. But again, I didn't necessarily have anything in common with them coming from where I'm from. So that trying to like really just trying to get into the mix of things just became more and more difficult as time went on, coupled with the fact I'm there during COVID. So a lot of the people that live, a lot of the transplants are all masked up, triple jabbed. I got denied access to one bar with a friend of mine who came down to visit because they asked to see our vaccination card. It was the only time I ever was asked of that, was trying to go into a watering hole. And they're like, no, you can't come here. You have to show your vaccine status.
Mhm.
So that was more or less what happened. Again, most of my family and friends were in New York, and everyone was like, just you did it, you tried it, I did fairly well down there. I bought some land and stuff, but I was like, I'm over it.
Yeah, and you were out of New York during COVID, which probably was reasonably
Probably for the
intelligent thing.
best.
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably a reasonably intelligent thing to do. I remember just reading about it. But were you keeping in touch, I'm sure, with people who still stayed there? Like, what was that like for people on the ground in New York during COVID?
Um, a lot of my friends just were working remote. It kind of worked out for a lot of people that I knew. A lot of people did get forced to take the jab, like government workers and then union shops for that matter. It came from the top saying you had to get jab if you want to keep your job. Um, and a lot of my friends are kind of entrepreneur types, so they kind of beat to their own drum. They didn't really have to listen to anybody. Uh, but it was I didn't visit New York during that time, and it was when I was on my way to a wedding in Rhode Island. I flew over New York City, and I was with my brother, and we're like, we got to figure out a way to get back to New York, man, because it's not working out where we live. My brother my brother's a much more open person and likes to communicate with people and learn people's stories and such. And he had a meltdown at that restaurant that I was discussing with the Afghan busboy was dishwasher. He was a dishwasher. Sorry, where the whole pronoun thing really disoriented him. Where like, oh, them over there. I was like, oh, those people over there. No, that's them. Like he goes, he kind of just blew up saying them, they, there. He just kind of like just went off on all these young people saying, I don't know what you're saying. Like you're
Yeah,
telling me these group of people over there, but
good
I'm
for him.
confusing with the word they, but that's their pronoun, but you're actually speaking. So it just became an absolute clusterfuck. Just trying to again communicate with others. It really came down to communicating with other Americans, and that is what really set me over the top.
So they were more lib shit in the heart of the South than than New York. It sounds like, just because of this weird transplant.
Well, because
group.
the difference between liberal in New York versus liberal in like a Portland or Asheville is that you have to adhere to the culture at large. Down there, because the Appalachian folk run parallel, they don't necessarily integrate or
Right.
get into whatever they do. They really keep themselves separated. Basically, like expats. They were the transplants are much like expats in their own country, and they move down there. They don't really follow any of the cultural norms, going to church, doing
Yeah.
being kind of more morally upright. They don't they treat the location like it's an extension of their living room. It's more of like sampling the culture, but not actually integrating with it. Where in New York, we don't really give a shit about where you're from. Shut the fuck up and go over there and get to work,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just more pragmatic. Okay. Last question about New York, and then I'd love to hear what happened with this hurricane. Is New York back, like, quote unquote, or is it a different New York after COVID?
It's a step down. So you're seeing a lot more like trash in the streets. You're seeing a lot more homelessness. It's a step down from what it was pre-COVID. So there's a lot more boarded up shops, a lot more commercial vacancies from what I see. As far as it being back, well, I can
Back
tell
to
you
the
at least, like,
70s.
no, it's not even that, because again, this whole
Not that bad,
progressive
I'm sure.
ideology is attached to all this. So you don't really
Right.
have like, hookers in the streets or like things like that. You don't see like destitute as you would think of what it was in like the 70s and early 80s. I wouldn't say it's like that, no.
Yeah,
Because it's like
I
some type
didn't
of
think so.
Karenocracy appendage to the poverty. Like I said, where you have these refugees or migrants trying to, make ends meet or just try to get some cash in their hands to go buy something. But no, you're not allowed to do that. You have to be over here. This is where you belong.
Well, okay, we probably should have touched upon it on the year-end show, but we're not in a position to really speak to it with any expertise. But maybe you are. Can you speak to the whole subway situation with like the Daniel Penny and Jordan Neely kind of phenomenon and people getting shoved into these subway tracks? I mean, what the hell
But
is going on? Like,
that's
is
always
that
happened. That's why I don't understand why it's in the news. That's always
okay?
happened in New
So my
New
question
York.
then is, you're right. It has happened,
It's in the
but
news now.
but
So
it is in the news, and so why? And then secondly, what is the sentiment in New York about that? Because like everybody who's not in New York is like, what the hell? This place looks like some kind of Mad Max movie or something. Like this is horrendous. Nobody would want to experience that. And so, and look, I've not seen that much of the New York subway system, but I have seen enough to know that this is very believable. And I've also seen other subway systems that are better and worse. And the notion that this is the best you can do is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, you can do much better. So I hope that at least people are striving for that. But I'm curious what New Yorkers' attitude is towards this.
so I went into New York City the day after the lockdowns, and me and my friends, we drove around Manhattan just to see what was going on and see how many people are actually staying home. And what was horrifying was that there was no one in the streets but homeless, drug addicts, and people that are schizophrenic. And the amount of people, when you take everyone off the city streets and just leave the homeless there, and again, all the types that I just described, you'd be horrified by how many people are walking around that are mentally deranged. It's crazy. It was startling to actually see that, and seeing the numbers that are hidden. These people are hidden amongst the crowd. You'd see them once in a while, but the overwhelming majority of people that you bump into are not crazy people. So I guess the whole Reagan deinstitutionalizing medicine, so on and so forth, and just heavily medicating a population. I think back then, 40 years ago, there was more of a regiment to watch after these people and make sure they're on their medication. Today, that doesn't exist. So the people would take their schizophrenic medication. They would be like, "Oh, I'm feeling much better. Look, I'm a functioning human being. Oh, I don't need to take this medication anymore." And they wean themselves off of it, only to wind up being back to being schizophrenic. So that's kind of what's
Let
what
me
I've seen. Yeah.
rephrase let me reframe the question. Okay, to a person who's not from New York, seeing all these news articles of these escapades, we'll call
Right,
it
right.
that, in the subway system and the city at large, is shocking. My question is, do New Yorkers agree with that assessment, or are they just tuned out and they don't care? They're concerned with making money and they don't actually want to clean the city up.
Everyone I bump into, regardless of their skin color or background, religion, et cetera, they've all have had it. They have all have had it, and a lot of people believe that the elections, no matter what in New York, in the boroughs, are just stolen outright.
Okay.
So everyone I bump into, regardless of where they're from, seems to be very pro-Trump, and
Okay.
I don't see any real like. There's nodules of like progressivism. You have Soho, Greenwich Village, kind of like the area where it's stratified monetarily. But as far as like working class immigrant, they're very pro-Trump. So the Hispanic population has totally had it with just the amount of other Hispanics showing up, and that's been for the past 20 years, where they're like, no, there's no more Mexicans like that. We're tapped out with Mexicans, right? No, we got to bring in El
Yeah,
Salvadorians
we,
now.
we we ran away from those people for a reason. Why are you bringing more of us?
Exactly. So that's the general feeling towards all
Okay.
this, and they also just want some type of law and order at this point. No one wants to see trash in the streets. No one wants to see these things. There's
Okay.
no one from another country that finds this acceptable.
All right. So that sounds fairly positive, and I guess if they don't believe in the election system, I'm not sure what they do. But what I did notice, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I noticed a shift in Mayor Adams, the black mayor
Yep.
of New York. He seems like he's like doing like, kind of like a pivot to the center or even to the right recently. Have you noticed that? You know what I'm
He
talking
he
about?
did that about a year or two ago when he spoke out about the issue with the migrants, air quote migrants, invaders. I mean, that's what they are. I mean, come on, let's be
Of
real about it,
course.
right? And he spoke out against it. And as soon as he started speaking out against it, that once he got off the plantation, that's where all these scandals started popping up regarding him. Where I don't know, what did he do? He had like a kitchen renovated from by some Turkish politician. I don't know what it was, but it was something that everyone knows most politicians do. Why are you signaling him out? Oh, because he spoke out against the
Okay.
flood of
So
the
what
Turk.
motivated him to make that shift? Is he actually trying to play to the electorate, or did he actually have a change of heart? Like what is that? I mean,
He's a native New Yorker, and I think he knows that he's very, kind of more like pro black, not
yeah.
back to African type, but very much more like street black. And the African American community in New York knows that the more and more people you keep flooding here, it hurts
Yeah,
them first and foremost before
that
it
makes
hurts
sense.
some douche in Alphabet City.
Yeah, I saw some like protests, like black protests, whatever those amount to, but like some protest videos of like these like cell phone camera black guys like standing in front of these migrant hotels, and they're like, "What is this, man? The black kids need the services and that kind of stuff." And so I can
Well, they're the
understand
first to
people.
usually get hurt by something like that, and a lot of blacks have relocated to other states. Even Harlem's like now being gentrified to a certain extent, but the gentrification keeps pushing further and further into their neighborhoods, and they're much more wise to a lot of these type of things because of the internet.
Okay. All right. Well, we've kept everybody waiting. Tell us about this big hurricane.
Well, I wasn't there during the hurricane. My mother was still there. She went about 8 weeks without running water, and she's about maybe 10, 15 minutes away from the city of Asheville. And this is from what I've been told by the locals, is that when the hurricane hit, and considering the elevation of Asheville, basically the storm just kind of just hovered around that whole area of Western North Carolina for longer than it had should. And it happened quick. I tried calling a lot of different people. Again, I have some real estate down there, so I'm trying to get in touch with my neighbors, asking what's going on. And everyone's phones were pretty much cut off for about 2 weeks. I didn't hear from my mother for about 2 weeks. She spoke to me maybe for like 10 seconds just to tell me that she's okay. She doesn't have water. So the funny thing is, your listeners would appreciate this. I left like all my prepper gear in her house. And she started laughing. She said, "Thank God you left these MREs for me, or else I wouldn't have anything to eat."
Nice job.
Yeah, right. So I thought that was that was
okay.
cool.
I actually want to get into this.
Yeah, go for it.
So I was watching the show from like 20 years ago. It's called Jericho, and it's basically about like what happens if the bombs drop in a small town in America. And I was like taking notes. I'm like, oh man, like this is interesting. And I've gone through the whole prepper tunnel of buying all the MREs and stuff. So I have all that stuff, but I never actually lived through it. And so I'm fascinated by what actually was useful for her and what was not necessary.
The gasoline I stored, I kept about maybe like about a little under 10 gallons at the house.
That can only last for about a year, as I understand it. Did that work okay? Or
I bought again. I didn't want to keep tons of gasoline at my mother's house because she was having a fit over it being in the house in the first place. And I told her this is for an emergency. Now, I think in 2022 or 2021, there was a gas shortage in Western North Carolina. I don't know if anyone really remembers that. But there was a big problem I forgot what there was a glitch or a hacker. Do you remember that? Some Russian hacker hacked the infrastructure for petrol services. Do you recall any of that?
Yeah. The Colonial Pipeline, is that what it was? Yeah.
So so I loaded up on gas. I actually had it prior to that happening. So I replicated that, saying, well, this could happen again, so let me keep some gas. So if you have to get food or whatever, or just get out of Dodge, I always have the gasoline there. She, typical boomer, that's not going to happen.
Right.
Just tons of gas, this, that, and the third. So the gasoline I kept for her, and I had this I don't know, some type of like bag or like a thing that was able to hold rainwater. So I had this contraption set up on the side of the house where rainwater, the gutter system, would go right into these
I'm playing the MacGyver music in my head right now as you talk about this contraption for water collection.
No, I don't know. I really.
Well, I got a raincoat and I pulled a piece of bubble gum out of my pocket and I saved my mom. It's like, wow, good for you.
It's a line. Hang on, sorry, 1 second. Just someone's trying to call me. Hold on 1 second. Sorry. Sorry about that. Wasn't expecting that. Anyway, so the MREs came in handy for her. The gasoline came in handy for her, and to a certain extent, this bag that holds water, collects rainwater, came in handy for her.
Did she get any zombie pelts? Were there any of those wandering?
As far as keeping the water fresh or whatever like that?
I'm joking, but were there roaming the streets, the undead?
Not where she lived. I'm basing this off of people I'm basing this off my mother and people that lived in Henderson County, where Henderson County did not get the full force of Helene as Asheville did. But most people, the people that I knew, handled it pretty well. My cousin lives about an hour north of Asheville, and basically it was all kind of like local types. They all came out. They all started just barbecuing, cooking what was in the fridge because they had no power. Right. And the people that live, again, maybe about an hour outside of Asheville, they have a bit of land. They have fresh eggs. The TradCon, the trad life types live about an hour outside of the city, so they all seem to fare pretty well. The progressive woke types, they're kind of like. I was about to say, how are the lawyers doing during all this? Well, those are the types that are second guessing their choice of relocating. I had one friend of a friend moved from New York City. They bought a home in Black Mountain, which again is a mountain, and they moved down there about 2 weeks prior to Helene there to get airlifted off that mountain. So they're obviously second guessing their choice of relocating, and a lot of people certainly have post Helene.
Okay, did you talk to your mom about this? Like she was in it during the storm, and I've never been in a hurricane. I've seen the aftermath of them sort of many years removed, and so I can see that they're a big deal, but I've fortunately never been stuck in one. But does this thing last for days and then like the water starts rising eventually? Like what was the sequence of events? Did you talk to her about that? Did you get a
Yeah,
sense?
it happened fast, man. I think it was in a span of like 12, 15 hours where it just rose astronomically and just everything was
Wow.
just people did not have time to adjust fire.
Right.
And I lived through Hurricane Sandy living on Long Island, and we had ample time to be prepared for Hurricane Sandy.
So
And
why was there no warning or understanding that this was going to happen? Was it just that the flooding was the surprise, or what happened? Like it went too far inland, like it never done that
yeah,
before?
correct. It was like this can't happen here. Like we're so far away from the ocean. What is it?
Yeah.
Like 8 to 10, 11 hours from the Atlantic Ocean to the Cape Hatteras. I think is like 12 or 13 hours from Asheville.
Maybe by
So,
driving or something,
yeah, by
but
driving, correct. Yeah.
The
So
area.
yeah,
Oh,
go on.
go ahead. Go ahead.
No,
Go
no, no.
ahead.
You go.
Well, I was just going to say the area has had huge flooding. I mean, that specific spot. There was the Great Flood of 1916. There was a flood in 1940, 1966, 2004. I mean, this is a persistent, perennial issue for the area.
It gets more rainfall than Seattle.
Yes, and it's part of this wider complex called the French Broad River Basin. And this used to be under I think it might still be under the authority of the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, but at the very least, they participated in a lot of the infrastructure development to assist in controlling floods. And they've tried many times to expand that level of control, and it's failed. There's always been environmentalist concerns since like the late 60s and 70s that have made it difficult to build more flood prevention. But this is an area that's had deaths, dozens of deaths per flood in the past. So this is not
Not anything new.
Not anything new. And if you look at pictures of the Great Flood of 1916, it is identical to pictures of 2024 Hurricane Helene damage. Bridges effectively underwater. You can see the top of a bridge. Instead of cars, you have railroads and railroad cars instead of automobiles. Almost completely submerged. You can barely see the top. Floating, in some cases, just floating down what's now a river that encompasses an entire valley. Pieces of homes, descriptions of people being swept away in like a wall of mud and just disappearing forever, never to be found again. The same kind of dynamic happens. So, I think earlier I was trying to get a sense of, is the infrastructure good? Is there corruption? And it does seem like this place has this perennial issue and it's growing rapidly. And nobody seems to really be looking at potential fallout if this goes wrong, as they've introduced a lot of people. It's denser.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I can understand, the casualty count in West North Carolina is well over 100 people, which actually surpasses the official death toll from
I've seen over 200.
Well, there is no great number, which I was struggling to find any solid figure. All I've seen
I made a note of that in the article too.
Yeah, all I've seen is that they're all over 100. So let's say it's somewhere over 100, 100 to 300. The death count in the Great Flood of 1916 is less than the death count now. And that's not something you see very often with natural disasters. Normally, when you look back in history, natural disasters have a much higher death count than they do now. This has sort of been the trend because we have better technology, flood prevention,
Yeah,
better
warning systems.
better urban planning. I mean, just tons and tons and tons of the levels of competence and levels of planning over the decades that have made these things less severe. And this is one of the few times in American history when it's gone in reverse, where actually the damage, the estimated costs of the damage are many times higher than the damage in the past, and the casualty count is much higher, sometimes 2 or 3 times higher. So this is not looking good, because suddenly we've reversed literally a century of progress in terms of making things safer and, less deaths, less damage. I looked it up, the cost adjusted basis for the Great Flood of 1916 is assumed to be somewhere like $600 million.
Oh,
And,
geez.
To today,
That's low.
now we're
That's low,
talking
yeah.
about, there's no great figure on the damage. I also noticed from Hurricane Helene, I've
Yeah.
seen 47 billion, 53 billion,
50 billion,
uh,
something like that.
but yeah, let's say 50 billion. So even cost adjusted 600 million to 50 million. Okay, we lose a few dozen people in 1916. Now we're at several hundred. So this is going wrong very fast. And it seems like if this trend continues, and if every 20 years there's another massive flood and the place keeps growing and less competent people are running it, what's it going to be in 20 years from now? 1,000 dead, $100 billion in loss, damages? Like, how bad is it going to go?
I'm a little less concerned, perhaps, just because I think a lot of this stuff is preventable.
It's totally preventable.
That's the
And
good thing,
it's
actually,
totally
about it.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's mostly preventable, but it's preventable.
Yeah.
And I mean, we can link it in the show notes here. I found some op-ed from Business North Carolina where it was written a few days ago, actually. And, basically the author of the article noted that in 66, there was a bad flood that decimated, not decimated is the wrong word, devastated
Devastated.
Asheville and a bunch of this wider watershed area. And the TVA came in, basically said, we want to build these, 14 flood control reservoirs throughout the basin. All right, we're going to, basically we're going to fill up these reservoirs when there's a lot of heavy flooding.
Mhm.
And you can use that for extra water during dry periods. Seems like a win-win, a good idea. And this
Something
was
the Chinese would do.
right. This is something that 19th century America would do.
Yes.
Right.
These big kind of big earth moving projects where you're like, okay, we need a win-win here. We need to save lives and we also need to plan for the future. So this is, a big project. Let's just do it, get it out of the way. And it was killed in 1972, and the proposal was like never revisited, basically. So and I found a couple articles talking about smaller attempts through the years to build more reservoirs, build better dams, some of the infrastructure reports.
So basically, it's those lawyers we were talking about before.
Yeah, I mean, I
Stop it.
found that, the 2021 infrastructure report card for North Carolina had 1,500 high hazard dams marked. So, not looking good. I mean, there was one from 2013. There was a report card from 2013 where the dams in the state earned the lowest grade of a D, which is one of the lowest grades in the country. And then 10% of the dams were apparently, quote, deficient.
Well, that stuff is ancient. I mean, I've been through the TVA area, and it's fascinating. It's really kind of cool to see all those little valleys that they figured out a way to build these dams in. And it's a very extensive system. It goes all over the kind of Appalachian, Tennessee, area, Valley Authority. But it was done in like the Depression.
Yeah.
So, dude, we're looking at 100 years at this point.
We're looking. I
mean,
the average age of a dam in North Carolina is, or I'm sorry, 1/3 of the dams are over 50 years old. So that's not even probably the real average age, because a dam can be, a little brick wall holding a brook back from 200 years ago. I mean, those count technically, and some of those are still around. So who knows what the real average age of the dams are in the state? But it's clearly old. If a third of them are 50, or over
Yeah.
50, that's not good.
Well,
So
I remember.
there's
Go
a
ahead.
lot of preventable work
Mhm.
that could have been done here, even a minuscule amount. And it's particularly odd what Lamprey was saying, that there's a ton of real estate developers moving in. You have a huge transient population. And you have a growing amount of kind of classic anti-infrastructure environmentalists who are also kind of, just sort of are tailwinds of these like boom city trends, who are now basically setting an entire area up to fail. Now you have 100,000 people. There's a few thousand people in Asheville in 1916. 100,000 in just the city alone, and then the outlying areas, who knows how many. And you're not going to build anything new to prevent flooding in an area that seems to have catastrophic flooding every 20 years. It seems, just kind of like incompetence. And I don't really understand what the game plan is. Are they just not going to rebuild Asheville? They're just going to kind of let it, go to sunder? I mean, what do you think they're planning to do long term for the city, Lamprey?
Well, I do know regarding the water situation. The one positive thing about these transplants, they're environmentalists, like through and through. They're very in tune with nature. Again, it kind of laid that out in the article, that they're all very much like one with nature types. There's again a lot of not-for-profits, environmentalists, so on and so forth. So to correct the situation regarding not having potable drinking water is that they've already started to redo the reservoir system that makes the water drinkable at a much faster pace. And a lot of the environmentalists were the first to jump on the water situation and try and correct that in a ways where they're not like caring so much about the turtles and the birds and so on and so forth. Like, no, we need water now because it's actually affecting them. So it's all pie in the sky and fantasy when you can put these ideas in another place where you don't and necessarily live. But when it's actually happening in your backyard, in your home, and you don't have drinking water for months on end, they're like, yeah, to hell with all this. Let's really think of some ideas here on how we can get water back into our faucets.
It's funny how that works.
Yeah. Um, and then the whole what you were talking about, like how come they haven't necessarily built the infrastructure in a way and a means to prevent things like this happening. I do think a lot of it has to do with corruption. I think the fresh money, the new money being poured in, they've kind of turned a blind eye to building those type of things to prevent a catastrophic flood. So a lot of again, you have an option here to sell this plot of land that your family's owned for 100 years and sell it for some astronomical amount of money. You don't necessarily care what that developer is going to do, and that developer is from another place. He doesn't care what happens to it in the future, and there's probably more or less them paying off some local politician, as I mentioned earlier about a lot of the bribes and scandals and kickbacks that have transpired the past decade. Yeah, it's no surprise. I visited and I sent Adam pictures of one community that was built along the Swananowhere River, and it's obliterated. It's gone. It's gone. The water, I think, rose about 30 or 40 feet. Some 100-odd homes were basically eviscerated, just hollow skeletons of themselves. The guy who built that either one kind of just laughed at the thought that like, oh yeah, you're gonna okay building this HOA community right along the Swananowhere River without any type of really plausible and realistic way of preventing those homes getting flooded. It's no secret and it's no surprise, and really just shame on those people who would think that that wasn't necessarily going to happen to them. Again, circling back to the whole Hurricane Sandy thing with people living on the water on Long Island, they knew that the ocean could wind up in their home. So when it happened, they were like, yeah, I knew that this may happen someday. Down there, again, maybe just the mindset of these people where again, it can't happen here, can't happen to me. I'm I'm a good person, but like just being daft to their surroundings. So,
You said 30 to 40 feet. I mean,
oh yeah, man, it's
that
bad.
is
Well, and the
that's
mud that was
basically,
left over is like
yeah,
still there. It's
that's
crazy.
basically 4 stories roughly. So for people that are just trying to get a sense of scale of how high this water will get, it's basically 4 stories. And the average building in a lot of these areas, correct me if I'm wrong, is really not more than a story or two. I mean, in a
Yep.
lot of these towns, literally the church is the tallest building, maybe at realistically 2 to 3 stories with a spire. I mean, these are not big buildings, and these are not buildings that have, big fancy like drainage systems in the city streets that can hold that much water. I mean, a lot of them are
It's funny. So speaking about this one community I was mentioning, it has a retention pond. The developer told the I guess the manager and the board of that HOA saying, hey, listen, this retention pond is only temporary. It's supposed to be naturally filled in by whatever the runoff from the river, the runoff from the mountains. You have to let the retention pond fill through during time. They didn't want to do it. They actually turned the retention pond into a regular pond. Now, I don't necessarily know if that was a contributing factor to why it flooded so bad in that specific location, but there's people, environmentalists have told that have echoed what I've just said, saying, listen, you can't do that here. I mean, there's only so much. You can lead the horse to the water. You can't force it to drink it. So there's obviously a pushback from people saying, no, we want this. We want to build this in-ground swimming pool in a location that could be a potential for a hazard. You know what I mean? And there was a little rambly right there, but I see a lot of that with the new development where they kind of bake in certain ideas and concepts or things that you're supposed to do when developing these communities, but do they actually follow through on what the developer had laid out? And again, because there's chinks in the armor as far as permits and codes. Like obviously the code book in Buncombe County is probably minuscule compared to something like New York City, but you have to go through the motions time and time and again to realize what works and what doesn't work.
Were there I don't know if I'm coming through. Were there discussions afterwards that your mom was privy to about what to do better next time? I don't know if that's something she could speak to, but there's got to be lessons
She's thinking
learned
about
from this,
moving
right?
back to New York. I think that's
Yeah,
kind of coming full circle.
that's
So
pretty
that
telling.
community,
Yeah.
that was under mud at this point, they probably moved back to where they hail from. A lot of people in Asheville and its periphery, the transplants, they all have second homes, usually from where they hail from. Maybe move back in with family and friends, or more, I should say, family to whatever state they reside from. So a lot of these homes are going to remain vacant for the foreseeable future. And you're actually also seeing in real estate prices in that area have taken quite a dip, but it's just like the situation in Los Angeles or whatever, the Palisades. Okay, all these homes are destroyed. Where are these people going to go? Only a certain amount of people can go back to where they're from. Only a certain amount of people can move with friends and relatives. So that's going to put a general pressure now on housing and further exasperating
Yeah,
already exorbitant
and also
problem.
materials costs, labor, especially with all the deportations, which I'm generally in favor of. We've been living on slave labor for too long, and it's like hey, actually, this stuff costs money. It takes people's time, it takes resources, and actually, you need to price that accordingly and correctly, and pay people a fair wage, etc. But it's going to take a long time. I was looking at cost estimates alone, not just like and if that's like using like current prices, it's probably not looking at the inflationary effects that this will likely have and which will raise prices. But cost estimates for this hurricane, as we mentioned, were about 50 billion, But the Palisades, I mean, it's looking like it might even be more than Hurricane Katrina, just because of the value of the property there, not because of the size of it. I mean, the number of people that died in Katrina was incredible. It was like over 2,000 people. In the Palisades, estimates are like maybe 20 something. So we're talking like 100 times worse, in terms of the lives lost. But in terms of the cost, it's probably above Katrina. And the homes that were built were very detailed, custom homes. They're not these tract housing pieces of junk that Lennar and all these companies in Texas build. So it's going to be a long time. It's going to be expensive, and insurance companies are going to go broke over this stuff. And so, fire insurance has been a topic du jour, but what about the flood insurance stuff? Have
Well,
you
flood insurance is
paid
separate
attention
from
to
regular insurance. You have to, that's
that?
an addition to whatever your regular homeowners insurance policy is. And
Do
a
you
lot of people
know
don't
they
have
don't
it.
have it? Okay. Yeah,
No,
in the
especially in a
South,
place like Asheville, they won't have it. No, they wouldn't have it down there. Some,
seems like
again,
they
some, but not all.
seems like they should. I mean, whenever somebody buys real estate, the real estate agent doesn't mean they will, but they can pull up flood maps and they can show people historical water lines during floods and see if
I
you're in a
think that
flood zone.
the government down there has done people an incredible disservice by not just making it plainly aware the history of flooding in the area. And my, quick research last night before the show to look into flooding took me 5 minutes to
Yeah.
find detailed maps, historical photos, lengthy pieces of information, description of the floods, the estimated damages. I mean, it's not, this is not arcane. And it seems to me that there was just an incredible disservice done and lack of understanding on the part of maybe the people now running the show in that area, what exactly this place is like. And
The-
they
I'm
seem
just
to
sorry,
just,
interject, because the people that run the show aren't from there.
yes,
That's what
yes,
that's
that's what I'm
that's
getting
the whole
at. Yes,
Sawana
yes,
nowhere. Where are you
yes,
from? I'm from nowhere.
right, yeah.
That's the whole crux of this. The people that, again, the Appalachian folk can adapt and kind of make do of what has just happened. Like I said, a family an hour north, they were barbecuing, the dogs are running around, everyone's honky dory. They have a what is it? A well system. So okay, we can't get potable
One of
drinking
those
water,
things.
but a lot
Uh,
of people get one of those things, right? So they have, again, they're much more um, realistic on things like this. But as far as like people that are city dwellers, city slickers, laptop class type of people, they're like, oh, it just happened, yeah.
So the people that are sort of out of their houses and living in FEMA tents or mobile homes right now, are those predominantly, you know, native Appalachians?
Yes,
Really?
yeah. Because the transplants are transplants. They go back, live with their mommy and
they
daddy,
left.
or yeah. So
They
they,
left. They
they
left.
left, or they're hot bunking with friends that they, working at restaurants. They're
So
coworkers from restaurants and shit.
are the rumors and some of the information that's come out of, both visual information, testimony from locals, some articles regarding the very catastrophic FEMA response, is it your understanding that a lot of those are true, that the FEMA response has been lacking, underfunded, sort of nonchalant?
And possibly malicious. I mean, there was accounts of helicopters trying to bring in relief aid that they were getting turned away. Now that may have been the sheriff's department, but regardless, it was so bizarre how this whole thing was handled.
It was
Elon was
chaotic.
trying to drop in Starlinks, and they were getting pushed away, and it, it was.
It
So
was
what's true?
generally
What happened? I mean,
it was chaotic. It was short, fast, and chaotic. And again, it's I've only lived through one type of disaster like this. Again, just from my experience with Sandy. Again, maybe just because the people in New York are like, I don't know how to describe. I don't want to say they're more intelligent or whatever, but like they're much more. They knew the series of steps on how to correct something and to get things up and running, because everyone needs to go back to work. You know what I mean? So like we got to get the trains running again because everyone works in New York City. So first things first, get the trains up and running. Make sure the lights are on, so on and so forth. Down there, because there's not like a industry per se, or like it's not like a zone, it's not like an economic zone for something that's really all that important to something of scale for the nation or globally. It was kind of like it was half-assed. It was half-assed
Yeah,
as far as the
sounds
FEMA's response. Not only that, but also the federal agencies that came to do a lot of the disaster relief work were not people from North Carolina. It was a lot of black people showed up from FEMA. I didn't know FEMA hired that many black people, but all the government workers that were there to provide aid
I'm surprised you're surprised. It sounds like a jobs bank kind of
was like
position.
TSA. It was like
Yeah,
yeah, Jobs
exactly.
Bank,
No,
right? Yeah.
exactly. I shared a video on Twitter. I don't remember the source, but it was pretty telling to me and not surprising, unfortunately. There was like a tree that had been felled. They maybe cut it down, or they were just cleaning it up. But you have to buck trees when they go on the ground. You have to chop them up because they're too heavy to obviously lift up by yourself. So they had a sort of like a water bucket brigade equivalent of like 20 FEMA workers wearing their stupid T-shirts and stuff, and they were handing each log as it was cut to the next person in a chain of people all the way to the pile where they were dumping it, and they were filming this like this was some sort of accomplishment, like, oh, look at how much assistance we're providing the locals. And I basically asked the question, have they never heard of a wheelbarrow? I mean, like they've got 20 people doing the job of what one Chinese, grandfather could probably do back in the old country.
Have you guys heard of this individual, Jake Jarvis, who is the owner of a precision grading construction company in North Carolina? He's one of these guys that's basically turned into like a local hero because he has dispatched his company and its resources and his own personal savings to help rebuild roads, clear sewers, get people's homes back up and running. He's basically rebuilding parts of the rural infrastructure alone down there. And he was building these sorts of like temporary bridges and temporary cut roads so people could get in and out. And the federal government was nowhere to be found. The government of North Carolina was nowhere to be found. No one's paying him to do this. He's mostly, I think, just taking some donations and labor where people are willing to offer it. But he's using his own company's equipment. And this is what it's come to, is that you don't even, I mean, forget the federal government. The state government doesn't even seem like it's adequately equipped to deal with this, both trying to prevent it and work on it after the fact. They're just relying on people out of their goodwill to keep this thing going. I think that should be very instructive for everybody. Like, when the chips are down and things are this chaotic, you can't expect a New York City style response. You may have to do this on your own. You may have to just volunteer. Like, there is no guarantee. Is that kind of your? Have you heard of stories like this, Lamprey?
Well, here's the thing, right? Places like California and New York have the tax base to fund a lot of these type of projects and stuff. A place like North Carolina, they don't really have. They have a tax base, but it's kind of like I said. The school teachers make what, $40,000 annual in North Carolina. And the cops are leaving in droves, as I mentioned earlier, because they're only making, again, $30,000 to $40,000. So there's not that big of, there's not a government apparatus, this big Borg to try to like fund a lot of these things and get things moving in a quicker fashion. You're going to have to rely on people such as this individual to get things done in a much faster and more efficient manner, relying on private, I guess whatever, just people that have, a big checking account to get these things done. You know what I mean? Like that's just my 2 cents. The thing is, like, that guy you're mentioning, that owns the asphalt company, the pavers, that guy's probably old money. Again, probably his family's been there for, a century or so or more. And those are the big movers and shakers in North Carolina, is the old money. So these guys and gals, whatever, want to be progressive, but they have
Or lesbian.
they wield a lot of the power and dictate a lot of the social the government policies in that locale. In other states or whatever, it's probably more spread out. There, it's more stratified. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Am I
that
making sense to you?
Yes, it makes perfect sense. And so are the reports of, to your knowledge, are the reports of people still not receiving help true? I mean, there are pictures and articles from a few weeks ago when there was a huge freeze across the U.S. East Coast. Maybe you experienced that.
Yep.
And you have dozens, hundreds of people in Western North Carolina living in their sedan with a tarp over part of it to create like a makeshift big tent. And this is basically what they're using to stay warm when it's, 8 degrees outside for several days straight. Is this, I mean, is this just not
100% true.
100% true.
So here's the other thing it's kind of, this is something else that needs to be noted. Because everyone in the city of Asheville and Buncombe County is more or less a transplant, and everyone is transient, and people only stay for a year or two, and they come and go, and you don't necessarily have that community that you can rely upon. People that have extra bedrooms to spare, or have a second home or an Airbnb or something like that, they're not willing to open their doors to these people because they're in fact strangers. You don't know these people, and with you don't necessarily know what the person's a stranger. So I have friends who have like 2,000, 3,000 square foot homes, and it's just them and their dog, but they're not willing to open their door because the other person can be a lunatic. And a lot of the people that gravitate towards Asheville are people that I mentioned in the article, kind of just these kind of deranged progressive types that with purple hair and shit. And you're like, nah, not really opening my door for you and your mangy pit bull. So that's another big problem, is the trust factor in a place where everyone is so transient it's been magnified because of the hurricane. Whereas the people, again, in the periphery, the Appalachian, the people addicted to fentanyl. All right, he's on fentanyl, but he's my cousin. Lock him in the basement while we try to find out what to do with him. You know what I mean?
Has there been any role that the churches have played in coordinating?
What were they doing for the Afghan refugees? So I'm sure the Afghan refugees are being well taken care of. Oh yeah. You were asking before who's funding all this type of stuff. Catholic Church was also a big player in relocating the Afghan refugees and sticking them in Asheville. Universal something church, a lot of these like Mickey Mouse, offshoot Christian denominations.
I know Baptists are big down there.
That's separate though. Baptists, look out for Baptists. So the Baptists only are more or less focused on their who fills their coffers, and those are the people that are the Scotch Irish types.
Gotcha.
Because that church is probably the biggest church in that region. And I did mention in the article that the Billy Graham Center is also in Asheville. So yeah. Which is
and
a lot.
What is it called? The Biltburg, or not the
Biltmore,
Bilderberg, but
Biltmore Estates. Yeah, that didn't get a affected. Only part, like the entranceway got affected. Because if you look at in most of the pictures that you see on like CNN and Fox News and stuff, that's downtown Biltmore, and that's basically where the Swananowhere and French Broad meet, and it's literally coming down. It's literally at the foot of a hill of like a mountain. I don't know what you want to call
So
it.
I didn't know what it was until I looked it up, but it's basically a Vanderbilt mansion. Is that right? It's the largest in the country, I think.
Yeah, it's the largest home in the United States. It's
Yeah.
probably it's the most popular tourist destination in the city of Asheville. Most people that visit Asheville go visit that. They visit the local IPA breweries because it has an obscene amount of breweries in its location, and also just probably hour to 2 hours away from the city of Asheville is like numerous national parks.
Okay. Okay. Well, what's the future going to hold for this place?
Don't worry, I it'll rebound. It'll take a long time for it to rebound. I don't necessarily think it's going to scare away any of these types that we kind of scoff at. It the thing is that a part of me was kind of like a little bit like I don't want to say I was like joyful in seeing Asheville get
Schadenfreude.
trashed like that. Like it kind of dawned on me a little bit like a couple when it first happened. I'm like, yeah, fucking Sodom and Gomorrah fucking deserves it. You know what I mean? And I was like, then like a couple days later, I'm like, shit, man, because the people that live there, as much as I kind of make fun of them, and I'm sure people on this side of the Great Divide we like to tease and mock at and ridicule, they're looking for the same thing that people on our side is looking for, which is meaning, which is
Yeah.
which is like just trying to make something of it all,
Yeah.
trying to get away from McDonald's. And I also digressing real quick. City of Asheville, the downtown itself does not allow private equity in its city. So there is no Dunkin' Donuts, there is no McDonald's, there's no Starbucks. So if you ever actually go visit downtown Asheville, you'll see that there
These are
is
publicly traded, but
there's
okay.
nothing. It's all it's all locale. It's all homegrown and mama. It's solely relied upon
Right.
family and mom
Yeah,
and pop
that's fine.
types.
Look,
You know,
honestly, I get what you're saying. I mean, and somewhere in the recesses of my blackened heart, there's some compassion as well for these types. At the end of the day, they're kind of broken, just like the rest of America is, and they're looking for a way out. And some of it is a false path, and
they're on the other side. They're on the other side of it all.
yeah,
That's just the way I look at
they're
it.
praying to Moloch, and they're doing. I mean, remember the like choose your fighter, like the hippie girl versus like Sydney Sweeney or something. Remember that like last
Yeah.
year? The weird chakra doing girl from I don't know, but it's the same crap. Like people are just trying to cope. So at the end of the day, they're human beings, and if we can look past all the politics, hopefully we can forge some sort of connection there. I guess the real question is, where do you go though? I mean,
Well, that's
it's
the big
like,
question. Where do you
are
go in
we
the
do we
United
really
States?
want to share a country with these types at the same time? Like, I don't really. I think actually some of them are not worth saving, but those that are, and I believe that some of them are just misguided, want to try to help, perhaps. Lessons learned. I mean, like, what did we learn from this at the very least? Like, people who take their environment and their surroundings seriously and take community seriously actually seem to do okay. And I think those are good lessons. Um, read any survival novel, you'll learn the same thing, but like this is the real life version of it. So
I'm more like just jaded by how transient the United States really is. I was blown away by so many different license plates living in Asheville and how easy even for myself just to pick up and move to another location and kind of expect. And I wasn't naive to that. Keep in mind, even though I spent most of my life in New York, I understand moving to another place. There's certain social norms that you must abide to or tolerate, so on and so forth. But I just remember, like, I was in some Benjamin Moore paint store, and this woman just cuts the front of the line and she's screaming at this fucking yokel about some paint color for God knows what. And she rattled off her area code. Well, you can call me at this number. And I remember the area code, and I looked it up, and it's Washington, Spokane. What is it? I'm sorry.
Spokane.
Spokane. And
Spokane?
Spokane.
It's across the
Washington.
country.
Right.
Wow.
And I was like, damn, man, like you're so far away from where you're from. And
That's her fifth home, not her second. Yeah.
Exactly.
Spokane for I guess if you're not do you know anything about
Spokane is actually not that rich of a place.
Yeah,
it's kind of surprising.
Is kind of, well, it's similar to Asheville. It's one of these places where it's realistically a frontier zone, or historically a frontier zone, like the lower foothills of the, let's say,
our friend Ryan Landry called it a glorified truck stop.
Yes, and there's like sort of a native class of people, sort of Anglo settlers that were really the ones a mix of Anglos and French fur trappers who settled in the area, and the rest of it has been
and Hispanic
migrants. That's come later. But there is this rich class that has tried to do to Spokane what they're trying to do to Asheville. That this sort of not genuine hipsterification.
Yeah.
Like it's not genuine at all. Actually, hipsters were like very genuine people who were trying to do something cool. This is sort of like post-hipster, weird gentrification that's actually just poisonous, not actually constructive, but poisonous. And it is that same mentality of no private equity, but we're going to have the local trans coffee bar that only serves like the finest imported Ethiopian beans, that kind of thing.
Right, harvested by some malnourished.
So Spokane, Walla Walla, they all have this, all this zones of Eastern Washington are identical to what you're describing in Asheville. I think that's really hysterical that these people just kind of bounce around from place to place like this.
Yeah, they got 50 million bumper stickers.
Yes,
love is
yes,
love. Yeah,
you will see Florida license plates in the Rockies. I mean, people are
on the move. Yeah,
like transient.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't get to mention though was that the transplants that I mentioned in the article, their demand for certain amenities that you'd only find in a place like Chicago or San Francisco, LA, or New York City for that matter. So they become very adamant and pissy that they can't have that coffee that was grown by transgender Ethiopian. And there's like a serious like demand, like kind of like childish demand that, what do you mean I can't have this? Like, I'm like, you're in Western North Carolina. Where do you think you're going to get these things? So that baffled me quite a bit, that they're so disillusioned and like, I don't know how to describe it, but like, yo, you're where do you think you are? Like there's a epidemic going on, a scamdemic happening. There's a supply chain shortage, and you're demanding all this, like a fancy granite swimming pool or some shit like that. That really troubled me quite a bit, that there's that many people so disconnected from reality and their surroundings.
It's people that use money to get things done for them. They're not used to doing things themselves. And I think it's very revealing that people who are used to a big city where there is a sophisticated, effectively a supply chain of anything that you could dream of is available to you for money, go to a smaller place that is somewhat remote, that is cut off. I mean, I think trucks were not even able to get in for a couple of weeks, if not more, where it becomes very obvious that money is really just a unit of account. It's not something that actually has intrinsic value if people don't have what you're looking for. You basically have to provision everything yourself at that point. And we were talking to Charles Haywood about this, like if you're on a desert island, I mean, your money is really truly worthless, and you have to be able to be resourceful in the truest sense of the word. And these people, they don't understand, I guess, how anything actually works. because it's really just a click away on Amazon or their
Here,
personal assistant.
here's something to speak to that resourcefulness. There were people, there's footage of this, who were using donkey caravans to move in and out of some of these regions in this wider basin after the floods. The year of our
That's smart.
Lord, the year of our Lord, 2024, donkey caravans and ATVs. I mean, and there were a couple of young guys who were using rope pulleys so they could get across these sort of stretches of highway that had washed away, and they're sort of climbing at like a 45-degree angle with a rope pulley to get from one side to the other, this 30-foot long gap. I mean, that is who survived and who got out. Some of these people actually used this technology or these skills to get out because they realized nobody's coming in here. Nobody. The state government's not coming. The feds aren't coming. Nobody is coming in here. We are stuck and the roads are gone. And those are the people that lived. So it doesn't matter how much money you have in a place like that. I think to what you're saying, Lamprey, like these people who are just sort of divorced from the reality of where they are. You could have had millions of dollars in your fancy granite swimming pool. And it turns out the yokels with the donkeys were the ones who were able to survive and get out of there once they realized, oh, this is fucked. Like we got to go. I mean, there is something kind of odd about these people. I don't really know what their game plan is, but when things go wrong, it goes really wrong for them, like really wrong, really fast. And they don't seem to have any sense of the history of a place, how to deal with their surroundings. Nobody Googled the Great Flood of Asheville. Nobody Googled the Wikipedia article on the history of Asheville before moving there. It's had like 8 or 9 bad floods that have killed 100 or 200 people before this one. I mean, nobody thought this could
let's talk
happen
about
again.
the general topic of this, because with the recent fires in
Yeah, this kind of circles back to the fires for
Los
sure.
Angeles,
Yep.
there was a lot of I would call excuses made by the ruling group of various administrators that were saying that, oh, we couldn't have anticipated, this was unprecedented. By and large, I think that's bullshit, because these
It's total
winds,
bullshit. It's total bullshit.
yeah, I mean, these winds have been there for
Well, the Santa
probably
Ana
thousands
winds,
of
the
years, and
Santa
so
Ana
ever
winds
since,
have been happening for forever. There are Spanish 18th century descriptions of California remarking on the wind, the fact that the whole place is on fire every other year, and remarking on a couple other oddities, like that there used to be a giant lake in the middle of the state, which is now gone. But they remarked specifically the wind and the fire. So at least 300 years we've known, people have been writing about this. In the 19th century, there were American explorers and American, sailors and tradesmen and, let's say, pioneers and trappers who were then, going into the area as the Spanish were leaving and the Mexicans lost it after the Mexican-American War. And that was something they noticed. Fires, wind, occasionally big mudslides. This is what they had, they noticed, but lots of fire all the time. The whole place is on fire every other year. What, they just lived with it. So this has been a known quantity for a long time. We did a whole show on this a couple of years ago. There are scientific studies that indicate the region we now know as California has been on fire since the end of the last ice age. There are soil samples indicating gargantuan, insane infernos about 7,000 years ago that would have just put these current fires to shame. Massive fires stretching dozens and dozens and dozens of miles, 100, 200 miles at a time, reaching insane temperatures, actually cooking the rock down to the bedrock in some areas. I mean, just completely devastating wipeout fires. So this is like totally known quantity. If you've ever been to places like Mount Baldy you can actually really get a sense of how fire has shaped the landscape. The trees in the natural environment are very far apart, and trees that are fire resistant are the only ones left up in the sticks. I mean, they're the only ones left. They're naturally fire resistant trees. And you can see how fire has literally sculpted the landscape. Thousands of fires have smoothed it out. The shrubs kind of hide in weird locations. This is, basically a place that's been made by fire. So everybody knows that it's on fire all the time. And the last couple of decades, tons of fires in Southern California. There's fires in the 90s in Malibu and Bel Air. All of Malibu burned down in like 95. This has happened in all over the
In the 60s, I think the fire that was in the region in the Palisades or something was also nearby in the 60s, and they had a lot of discussion of this very phenomenon.
Oh yeah, I mean this is fires are known, okay, and this is just known. It's been documented since the 17th or 18th century. The archaeological and geological records indicate that this has been going on since the end of the Ice Age in North America. This has just been a factor of life in that area. As soon as the trees came out after the end of the Ice Age, the place started catching on fire all the time. And it was just sort of natural. It happens. There's nothing you can do about it. You cannot prevent it. You can't stop the wind.
You can mitigate it.
You can mitigate it. There's a lot of smart things you can do. And the state used to have a very easy way of dealing with this, which was the timber industry.
Yeah, it's called cutting the trees down.
We talked about another show on the history of lumber.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, the state has had a double-digit decline in sawmills, companies that actually provide.
I heard a
equipment.
statistic that they used to pull out, and I don't remember the exact number, so let's just say percentage terms. They used to pull out 100% at the peak, obviously. It's something like 25% of its former level, which just doesn't make any sense given how much is lost to fire to begin with. At least take that part out, and then you wouldn't have all these fires. They still can't wrap their head around that one, apparently, in California.
There are entire logging towns in the north and central areas of the state that are ghost towns now.
They're ghost towns.
They're ghost towns, literally ghost towns.
Again, if you guys, can I real quick
sure,
question? Yeah. So I've seen a lot of the videos out of the Palisades regarding the fire and such. One guy's recording his home being burnt down on a beach. How come? And again, I'm ignorant. Couldn't they just pump the ocean water to the Palisades to put some of the fires out?
They started doing that.
They started doing that out of desperation. There are several
damages equipment, but
there's a lot of problems with it. They did it at the end. So when by the third or fourth day, when most of the Palisades was gone and it looked like Santa Monica, the city of Santa Monica, now you're out of the hills. You're basically into the flat area that's urban, has high rises and apartment buildings. They were evacuating it, and it was hardcore evacuation. Like, we could lose the northern half of the city of Santa Monica. That was when the seawater was pumped out, because if Santa Monica was destroyed, this would have been probably the costliest natural disaster in American history. You would have been talking about the death toll shooting up to the triple digits, now at least a $200-300 billion damage. I mean, if you lose Santa Monica, then this thing is going to probably burn realistically to Bel Air, and then the whole thing's toast. That's the entire west side of LA. And if you lose that, then the city of LA is going to go bankrupt, because that's where the taxes come from. So the seawater came at the end because it's out of desperation. As Adam said, damages equipment. And some of it is permanent damage. You basically need to remove, and you can't even repair it. You just have to remove and replace the equipment within a week or two. Secondarily, a lot of the water around Southern California and the coastal water is polluted. It's toxic. You really shouldn't go in it outside of a few key beaches, like maybe by Manhattan Beach, or Zuma, but I really wouldn't go there either. Most of the water around LA is just a complete shithole. Places residents would know, like Dockweiler. just terrible quality water, full of industrial runoff, human feces, garbage. And if you pour even just pristine ocean salt water on, let's say, foothill soil, you're going to permanently destroy that soil for a solid couple years. Nothing's going to grow right. If anything is growing, you're going to kill it. So you're going to basically kill all the shrubs that are barely clinging to life, and which just creates more tinder. So you only do the seawater thing if you're at the point of complete desperation, which is what they did. Now they're going to have a new problem in a few years where they've now managed to kill off whatever was left of the shrubbery. Nothing's going to grow back properly. And they've dumped a bunch of polluted, toxic seawater.
Properly. They got natural fire breaks now.
Yeah,
Maybe
but
it's
I
a
mean,
bonus.
well, yes and no. I mean,
I'm
you
sort of
have
joking, but
you have a you have a real now major environmental risk in the form of mudslides. So
yes, that's true. That's very true.
this
That
is now,
happens
I
too.
mean, the more devastated the area is, especially given the topography, you have the increase of mudslides just goes up exponentially. I mean, they've guaranteed them now. They're
Yeah.
going to have them. The next rainy season could be next year, could be 4 years. It's going to happen.
It happens after clear
And
cutting.
it's going to
It happens a
be
lot,
it's
yeah.
going to be bad. I think this is actually part of the real reason that they're delaying the inevitable rebuild is because they know the soil is completely loose. There's nothing holding back just several square miles of foothill at this point. It is all going to come down the minute there's a bad rainstorm, and they know it. I think that's probably part of the real reason that there's been this sort of weirdly telegraphed delay regarding rebuilding, because if they try and rebuild and the whole hillside comes down, they're going to be in an even worse shape. The thing with mudslides is that they happen much faster than fires do. It's sort of just a sudden explosion almost. It's just the ground literally just moves all of a sudden. And it's more likely to get people killed, at the very least injured and trapped. So it's going to be a perennial issue for months going forward. So the seawater thing is really like a double-edged sword. You can put out fires with it, but you're limiting your ability to use that equipment in the future. You've basically scorched the soil. You've put pollutants because the water in the Bay of LA is really polluted. It's a bad situation all around. They're really lucky they didn't lose the city of Santa Monica, because that would have been, as I was saying,
Is that where Venice Beach is? Where's the famous one the bodybuilders work out on?
It came close to that beach, from my
yeah,
understanding.
it came close to Venice. I mean, Venice is down by Santa Monica. I mean, Santa Monica isn't just the beach; it's like a wider city that
Right.
goes into the inland on the west side towards Culver and all these places. I mean, this is, when people say the west side of LA, this is what they're talking about. If you look at a map of the city of LA, which is different from LA, the metro area, LA, the county, the city of LA is sort of this weirdly shaped municipality, and it's carved in such a way to extract revenue from like white people in the beach and then give it to like retarded Guatemalans in East LA. I mean, it's just crafted in like a perfectly evil way.
So this another lesbian, of course. This black mayor, Karen Bass, she's in charge of what scope of that
She is
valley?
the mayor of the city of Los Angeles,
Which includes just that, or does it include Santa Monica? Does it include like
it includes
how far does it go?
It includes parts of Santa Monica. Parts of it doesn't. So I encourage people to look at the municipal map of the county of Los Angeles. And it is an incredibly complex series of overlapping municipal governments. It probably rivals New York in the borough system for complexity. It is way overcomplicated. The city of LA itself encompasses a lot of strange, disparate territories that are really places nobody else wants, with the exception of the West Side. And it stretches all the way from West Hollywood to Seal Beach, which is really an extremely long amount of territory that have nothing, almost nothing to do with each other. But she is head of that. Now, there's other authorities that she works with, including the LA County supervisors, who are sort of their own branch of government that have their own thing going on. And then you have to work with the other cities of LA and the other cities of Southern California, of which there are many,
So
dozens.
who is in charge of that Santa Ynez Reservoir, which had a capacity of
That was
approximately
LA.
100 million
That was
gallons?
LA. That's the city of LA that's LA DWP. So that is the city of Los Angeles is in charge of that reservoir,
Which is under her, I assume.
which is under her. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so she's got a major L on that one, because that one had 30 times the amount of water that they ran out of from their emergency storage tanks, and it was
Yeah.
empty for over a year. Doing what exactly? There was a guy who went up there. I reposted this on X, but he basically just took his phone and he's like, "Hey, this is the reservoir that's right in the Palisades. It is bone dry. I don't see any construction equipment up here. They said they closed this for maintenance over a year ago. There's nothing happening. Why aren't they fixing it? Why can't they fill it up in the meantime?" Like,
So
pretty
for people
obvious
that
and good questions, right?
for
Like,
people that don't know, Los Angeles and Southern California have had very wet years the last few years. Extremely wet, abnormally wet. Tons of water, so much water that there were satellite photos of the coast of California. I mean, there's actually across the whole state. Coast of the California, there's these huge sort of alluvial plains or wetlands that feed into the ocean, that come from the river systems that feed off the mountains of California. And the silt deposits were so extreme because of the amount of water coming down. You could literally see these sort of white fans going into the ocean because of how much water had come down. So none of this water was preserved or captured adequately. It all flowed out. Literally nothing was done with it. Um, there's no excuse for not having filled that thing up. I don't know what the real story is there. LADWP is, like most institutions in California, historically very corrupt. And the problem most likely was that this was a kickback scheme for some contractor. And who knows what exactly the scheme was. Maybe they were pretending to work, or they needed to keep finding issues before they actually did the repairs.
I mean,
I
there
don't
was
know.
nothing. I
But
mean,
there's
absolutely nothing
so
up there. The guy was like filming it.
there's no real explanation for why it was stuck like that. It has to have been grift.
Yeah,
Um,
they handed
and
out a contract to a
yes,
buddy, and they didn't do
something
anything.
weird was going on, and it was just typical grift, and they just got caught out with it. The head of the DWP apparently makes $750,000 a year. There's footage of her. She's a retarded Mexican woman who literally cannot speak English. And I heard from someone who speaks Spanish that her Spanish isn't so great either, because she then was apparently giving interviews in Spanish. So she's just probably generally an idiot. Worked for the U.S. Coast Guard for a number of years, which is, no offense, but not exactly the leading minds of the country. And, um, this is now her gig, is making $750K a year, leaving reservoirs dry. Um, it's just like criminal incompetence. The really bad story that people aren't paying attention to, that's probably more similar to North Carolina, is not the Palisades. Because the Palisades is like a big bedroom community. Yes, it's really sad, it's bad, and there were businesses and some, basic elements of like civil infrastructure lost. But the Palisades is a big bedroom community. It will rebuild for them, probably. The people there have a lot of
Well,
resources.
it's an incredible location. I mean,
It's an
there's no
incredible
question.
location. They're well connected. They don't just have money, they have power. And this is where the powerful members of Los Angeles live. So they're going to get what they want. At the end of the day, they're going to get what they want. By hook or by crook, they're going to get it. The other people who got really screwed are the people over in Altadena, which is much more similar to, let's say, North Carolina. Historically middle class, some kind of poor in some parts, kind of a mixed bag. Um, you don't have a lot of rich people living in Altadena, and it's a lot of small business owners, working class, city, county worker types. These are not people living high on the hog. They are totally screwed. So Altadena does not have the resources of the city of Los Angeles. So it is its own city. It's its own municipality. And it does not have the capability to basically, leverage the same resources and connections that LA does. It just can't do that. So,
sorry, go
yeah,
on.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, what I was going to ask, there's conspiracies rung amok. I read some of the Reddit forums about Asheville and of the fires in California. A lot of people think that this is like a big land grab. So people are citing that
15-minute
there's
city.
lithium in the mountains, and that's why there's some type of climate engineering to try to get the mineral deposits in parts of western North Carolina. Obviously, there was the Butte fire like maybe 5 years ago that killed a lot of people in California, citing they're trying to dislocate these people, get them off the land, kind of the whole Kyoto protocol, trying to, strong arm people into relocating to these nodules in these corridors in like the urban periphery. What do you guys think of all that?
I think people
Possible, but I don't
they
think.
underestimate just how dumb the modal California government worker
I think
is.
that's more likely
I mean,
the
I
biggest
really,
factor here.
I mean, really, truly, people do not understand. These people are retarded. They are extremely dumb. They are extremely lazy. They are malignant. They're just bad.
I
And
shared the story once before. There was a California congressperson or some, I don't know, the equivalent of the swamp creature in DC for Sacramento. But I was at a museum, and one of these idiots was on the tour, and we were standing in front of a painting, and it had the the little golden emblem, with the information on it. And he asked the tour guide, when was this painted? And he's like literally about 2 feet in front of this little plaque, and it says like 1831 right in front of him. And he asked this question, and it was a few minutes after I'd sort of gotten to say hello to him, and he introduced himself. Oh, I'm the guy. Yeah, I'm from Cupertino. Yeah, I had the honor and pleasure of the great late Steve Jobs. Being able to interact with him on a frequent basis. You could really quickly tell how dumb this person was when he did that little maneuver in front of the painting. But also the way he was speaking is very smarmy, very kind of just, I don't know, like there's no actual brain there. It's all just designed to like read the room and emulate whatever the person in power is doing. And that's how a lot of these people worm their way into positions. They kind of flatter, they ingratiate, and they really have no skills whatsoever.
yeah, and so I think people genuinely, and I don't fault them, they genuinely don't understand how incompetent and corrupt California is. What you were saying earlier about Western North Carolina shocked me because, um, you know, actually all three of the West Coast states have a huge corruption problem. But California is very special in that every major municipality in the state has had an enumerity of corruption problems. In many cases, people going to prison, and it's been this way for decades. It's just rampant. And they're not corrupt. The actually clever ones seem to just be corrupt. Everyone else is dumb. And they just don't understand what they're doing. So there's a very simple thing that they could have done, for example, to avoid this fire in Altadena that I was talking about. So it seems like the preliminary, investigation is that it was a utility line. This is like a well-known problem in the Western United States, from Montana to California to Oregon to Idaho. They all have this problem. Aging electrical infrastructure
You mean
catches on
overhead power line?
overhead power lines, okay? Aging overhead power lines poorly placed, not well maintained, subject to high winds, is just falling down. And it's live. They don't perform an emergency shutoff in time. So these are live wires. They hit the ground. They basically hit a giant, I don't know, garden of dead trees, and the thing lights up instantly like a bomb going off. It's actually kind of surreal. And there happens to be 40-mile-an-hour winds going on while this is all happening in real time. So then
Why did the
suddenly
wires break loose? The wind or something, or what would
they have,
happen?
yes, it happens all the time. These are half of these fires, like the Butte fire that you mentioned earlier, Landry.
Yeah.
These are basically utility fires.
Yep.
These are utility line fires in, remote regions of the state sometimes, and these things haven't been repaired or maybe even looked at by a human being in person for 10, 20 years. It's possible no one's actually visited some of these lines because they're that old, and they're there. And nobody really knows what's out there anymore. You're relying on the utilities company's maps to basically tell you where some of this infrastructure is. And that's all there is. So I think that this happens just frequently in terms of why it happens. It's just old. I mean, it just falls apart, and nobody maintains it. And so there's very basic things they could do. For example, and they could have just cleared brush and trees in a 200-foot radius around all these sort of utility line corridors. Why not do that? That seems like really simple. You could even clear brush from the sides of highways.
The fire break.
Yes. I mean, this is like standard stuff that, most people would
But
see.
that would require killing less than 1/100% of the vegetation in the area.
Right,
That's
right,
not
exactly.
allowable.
So this, the stupidity of like falling for a whack job environmental group. Many of these environmental groups are made up of like 5 people, but
Yes.
which is, and they
But they're
like
very
were able.
concerned, and
They're
they
very
fold their arms
concerned.
really hard.
Yeah, and so the stupidity of like the average California bureaucrat can't just parse like, oh, this is like 5 people. They really think it's, like the concerned citizens of the Pacific Coast is like a legit, uh, you know, I don't know, legit organization doing something real, and it's not like 5 whack jobs. And so they basically say, oh, well, brush clearance near major highways, we're actually not going to do that anymore. This is like a real thing that's happened. We're just not going to do that. We're not going to do that. That's environmentally dangerous, so we're not going to do it. And it's totally insane. You're like, why would you not clear brush near the highway? I mean, there is a fundamental myth that like all these fires are some idiot like flicking his cigarette butt into the forest, or that it's, the chains in the back of a truck. There's these myths about how these fires start.
Well, I think some of that's true. I can tell you for a fact
5%
that
of
trailers do
5% of
cause
that.
fires.
Yeah, sure. But the majority of these fires are whack job homeless people or utility lines. Like 90 something percent of them are just one of the two.
What about lightning? Don't have
Dry
there?
lightning fires are actually an incredibly small percent of the recorded wildfires in the last 10 years. It
in
is
California.
in California. In California.
Other places, it's the
Yes,
majority.
but the vast, I mean, the number of wildfires are lower in those other places. So you see the pattern here.
Okay.
It's rare that you have, actually, dry lightning is rare on the West Coast in general. You mostly
Well,
find
I don't
that
know what you
once
mean by
go-
dry lightning. I mean, when there's a storm, that lightning causes fires too. But in any case,
Yeah,
What
so-
about
what you were
let me-
saying.
What about like I'm circling back to the whole Butte fire and seeing swaths of blocks being wiped out, and there's like one house that's unscathed. What the hell is that about?
It's just pure luck. I mean, it has some. Well, it's luck.
No,
and it
so
has-
I think one of those guys like he got his hose or something, and he was like trying to prevent like the whole thing from going
Did
up.
you see the Asian dude taking soy milk and dumping it on the fire? Did you guys see that picture?
That's
No.
brilliant.
That
no.
was pretty
I mean,
hilarious.
there's a huge element of luck. You basically get lucky with the winds. The embers just for some reason don't hit your house, which is how these things spread. It's just embers and high winds. They just move from house to house. Normally, how it works is you have an ember. Sometimes these things are really no bigger than your fingernail. get into an air duct in your attic, and then it's game over. It basically, once it's in there, and it hits that insulation, your house is done. There's no saving it. But that's normally
Well,
how these things spread. They're kind of moving around.
When I lived in Asia, this was common where, corrupt government officials would set fire to, hamlets and stuff to as a massive land grab, five years down the line. I was like, oh, look, they redeveloped it for
I
some
actually
crony or
don't think
whatever.
I don't think that people in charge of quote unquote of California are actually that clever, but
Yeah, I
or
don't think that they're not that
yeah.
smart. They're
Okay,
not that
so
smart.
my knowledge of California is extremely limited. I wrote an article. It's one of the articles I'm more proud of about the LA riots, and I read about 4 or 5 books on the LA riots. Two of them written, one written by Daryl Gates, and the other one by his underling.
Wait, was he the police captain or
Yeah,
something or
yeah, he was the head. I read his biography and I read his underlings book as well. And a lot of things you're saying kind of echo what they had written. And these books are 30 years old. So for that 3 decades of not really taking care of infrastructure, pointing out some obvious things to take care of, it says a lot. It says a lot that it's taken to this
The
well,
this
state
level of tragedy to
the state
make
runs on the
something.
fumes of its golden age,
Yeah.
stretching from the 30s to the 70s.
it's just a nice piece of real estate. I mean,
And yeah,
ultimately,
the
that's what
fume
drives it.
when all the major infrastructure was developed in that golden age. Pat Brown, who was the father of Jerry Brown, was
Hmm.
sort of the head of this trend. Um, and it sort of ended with Duke Magee, and he was sort of at the twilight of it. But uh, that was the golden era of California when it evolved extremely rapidly from a mostly poor, rural, sleepy state. It was believe it or not, it was like
Well, it was a frontier. I mean, it was basically everybody.
it was a heavily Protestant WASP frontier state.
Yeah,
And
the gold rush brought a
right.
lot of
Yeah.
people over, but they had to come on ships because there was no railroad. I mean, it was really a far away place. Like the Sierras and the Rockies were dividing
And
it from the
even
rest of
and
the
even
country.
all the way up to the 20s and 30s, it was a very sleepy zone. I mean, most of Southern California was still cattle ranch land. I mean, this was places where there's now massive favelas was basically just cattle land 100 years ago, and in some cases had some oil derricks. They used to pull oil out
You
of the
guys did a
ground. So
whole podcast on Shockley and the
yeah,
how Silicon Valley became what it is and
it was just
I should say.
orange groves. It was orange groves 60 years ago. I mean, it was literally just oranges out there. There was nothing. And this place developed really fast and rapidly fast. And it was the golden, this golden period is what fuels, I don't know, the state
Well,
today.
I think it could very well continue that if the demographics were different. But I think the problem is it's got so many randos from all over the world, and unfortunately, a lot of them are from the third world, that it makes it ungovernable. And you've got, I mean, just look at who's running quote unquote Los Angeles. How does somebody like that get elected? It's people who look like her or
She,
identify with her
she's
that
she's
vote
kind of
for her.
she's the quintessential third world politician. So
She was in Ghana
Yeah, I
well
while
see.
this was
she's well
popping off.
she's an elderly woman, so she's like 70 something years old. She was a member of like a weird Marxist guerrilla group when she was in her teens, and then evolved into like mainstream Democrat politics or something. She's part of a cult, which is another kind of hallmark of weird third world leaders. They're all in like some cult or some like weird religious affiliation that's not just like normal religion. It's just some whack job stuff. She's been a big Scientologist, acolyte, or companion on and off over the years. And most of all, she's fucking stupid. And that's like the quintessential hallmark of like third world leader. She's just dumb. She's like I mean,
And also not self-aware enough to know
not
she's dumb.
self-aware, just really dumb. She's kind of like was promoted through the system as like like a I don't know, like a willing participant in California Democratic Party politics, and she was would just do whatever she was told. And I think that at the end, her service for decades was rewarded with mayorship of the city of LA. And, it's really interesting. She ran this campaign against this guy named Rick Caruso.
Developer.
Rick Caruso is basically the Donald Trump of Southern California. For people who don't know who Rick Caruso is, that's basically, if I had to describe him, that's it. He's a kind of larger than life, funny guy who's a self-made billionaire who's into real estate business. And he decided in a couple of years ago, he was going to run for mayor of Los Angeles as he was like a registered Republican for decades, realized that wasn't doable in California. So now he's running around pretending to be a Democrat or something, it's pretty funny. He just like switched his party the day before he announced his campaign or something. But so he ran this campaign, and his chief criticism of Bass and city of LA in general was that it's a dump, and Southern California itself is a dump, and LA is sort of leads the rest of the region in a lot of ways. So if this is a dump, then the whole place is going to be a dump. And he highlighted a few problems. Number one, there's a ton of fires. There are a lot of these commercial structure fires throughout the city of LA that were growing. Nobody could really pinpoint why. There's just suddenly buildings catching on fire. And B, there's a huge public safety concern. And C, he explicitly pointed out in his campaign a few years ago that the LA Fire Department was underfunded and it needed more money. So he lost. He lost, not too bad, but he just lost. And all of his criticisms came true, that like there is a underclass of people that are going around setting shit on fire. When people talk about it's like a conspiracy, the government's in on it, I don't think so. I think that the governments in this country, municipal governments, have no clue what to do about the fact that there are brigade-sized armies of whack jobs that are running around with nothing better to do but light stuff on fire. I'm sure New Yorkers experience this. Like, nobody knows what to do. But there are thousands, tens of thousands of totally whacked out of their mind, evil people that are free, just given free reign. And they are really the people who are starting these fires. They're drug addicts and transients and weirdos who are doing this for fun, for some scheme. If there is a conspiracy in Los Angeles, I would have to assume it's actually maybe the gangs. There is a huge gang problem, and there were reports of gangs moving into evacuated zones that hadn't been hit by fires yet, but were forcibly evacuated. And there were then reports of people moving in there, robbing homes. They arrested a couple dozen, some of them dressed as firefighters, one of them in like a fake police car. So this is more sophisticated.
What about, could it, not to get too deep in a rabbit hole, maybe Chinese government, borders wide open. They already
Yeah, I mean,
bought up
I think
Vancouver.
that could be it. That could be it. I mean, I think that, there's different levels of what it could be. It's more than likely it's just stupidity. It's like not clearing
I agree.
the
I
millions
agree
of
with you on that.
the millions of dead trees just lying around, like nobody's doing anything about that. Um, at a higher level than that, it's like, like municipal incompetence, like not filling the giant water reservoir for a year straight. Then there's
Right, but
another.
it's ripe for the picking. I mean, like
Yeah,
it seems
yeah.
like it's just like my always thought that like the whole West Coast, because of its again laziness, incompetence, everything that you've rattled off is just ripe for the picking for for China. Because I've covered the Vancouver model on my podcast ad nauseum about Vancouver being a vassal of Hong Kong, and now Hong Kong's now part of mainland China. that since they already got Vancouver and now the
but
California's a failed state.
They didn't have to destroy the infrastructure to buy up Vancouver. I mean, they just did that the old-fashioned way.
Yeah,
Why?
there's plenty of that on the West Coast already.
That's right.
They're
That's
already,
exactly right.
they're already doing that.
Perfect
They're all over the place. I mean, a Chinese company nearly bought the port of Los Angeles a few years back, or port of Long Beach. So,
Yep.
you know, they're already there. They don't have to blow stuff up or set people on fire to do it. I think that this is mostly incompetence, and to some
Yeah.
extent, it's also probably, if there is a conspiratorial element, it's organized crime that could really be at the root of this, and it's
I
more
think
than
there might
likely
have been
South America.
opportunistic
Yes,
fires
and there's a
being
lot of
set.
opportunities.
I have a feeling that it was just it was a natural thing that was compounded by the incompetence and then compounded again by arson. I don't think this was some grand conspiracy. I could be wrong, but I don't really see, the whole like, oh, they're trying to build a 15-minute city, so they have to burn up the most desirable real estate. It never made any sense to me. Why don't they burn up?
That doesn't make any
It
sense.
wouldn't be that spot either. That would not be the location that they
yeah,
would do
No.
it in either.
Why would
if
you
you're trying
do that?
to
Like-
if you're trying to rebuild, so first of all, the Palisades is the tax base. That's the tax base of the city of LA. So I mean, LA was already having a budget problem. I have no clue what it's going to look like a year from now with a huge chunk of your reliable tax base gone, literally gone, like burned down. There's no way they would
Maybe
do
all the
this.
homeless will move there.
There's no way that anyone would do this for like some complicated real estate scheme. Like, this is just going to be a complete disaster. There's no way that you would hose the insurance companies and the state insurance fund, which is going to be on the hook for all of this, just to make a 15-minute city or something. There's no way it's that. I just refuse to believe it. I think that it's mostly laziness and incompetence. And if there is conspiracy, it's something, it's things that people don't really believe exist anymore, like organized crime could really be behind it, or to an extent taking advantage of it.
Can we talk about the Democrat machine in California? Not that I have a huge understanding of it, but obviously it's a Democrat-run state, and you have, this equivalent of the Slick Willie, although he's less charming, but he's got enough slick in his hair that I think the name fits. Gavin Newsom has been getting rightly lampooned on social media about
he doesn't
the
have
true sociopathic way of his
He's a
communication
comic
style.
book villain, man.
He looks
Yeah.
like the
Comic book
Joker.
villain.
He doesn't have. Well, actually, we have a New Yorker on the call. I'm curious. What is the New Yorker impression of someone like Gavin?
Well, I remember him being on, I think, David Letterman. That was the first time I ever saw him. It was like 20 years ago. When I first saw him on David Letterman, my first thoughts were like, this guy
He was
looks
the mayor
like
of San Francisco, and then
that's it. When he first became mayor of San Francisco, what year was that? By anybody?
sometime around then, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I first saw him, and I'm like, this guy looks like something from a Batman movie or some shit. Like, this guy, I was downright horrified by. I could just see just being, he looked just like someone who is a sociopath. His slick back hair, his big white smile. I was like, damn. What do I think of him? Well, he's Getty money, correct? If I stand corrected.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I think so.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah, big time.
He just looks like he was, someone was born with a silver spoon up his ass. That was just my general 2 cents of him when I first saw him, and I still think of that.
I think what Hans is asking is, how does he compare to like a New York style politician? Like, how would he fare?
Yeah.
He's too superficial. That's why he'd fail right on his face. He's not, like Adams. He's like, he speaks like he's in the projects. It's like, I live a sustainable life. Or I live a plant-based centered life. I forgot when he said that stupid shit. What was the one that I love so much about Adam? Nothing beats New York City tap. He's drinking tap water in the projects. He's a little bit more like de Blasio. I see some similarities between him and de Blasio, though de Blasio seems to be more of aloof than Newsom. So
What happened to that
Who do you
guy?
think is a
This
more talented politician, Cuomo
Newsom
or
for sure.
Newsom? Really, as
Compared
opposed
to De Blasio, please
no, to
stop.
Cuomo. Cuomo.
Oh no, Cuomo's better.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cuomo's he
well, there was
lasted a lot longer.
Mario, and then there's Chris, and there's Andrew, and they're all like
Andrew.
do
That's what I
different.
mean.
Yeah, Cuomo lasted a lot longer. His reactions to major events, through either whether it be St. Floyd or a natural disaster, he composed himself much better. And keep in mind, Cuomo was out there every day, 8 o'clock in the morning, talking about COVID, what the game plan is, what he's going to do. So a lot of people, whether right-leaning or left-leaning, or whether you think it was a scamdemic, people like to see him do those press conferences every day. They felt like that was taking charge.
Yeah, that's what a leader's supposed to do. They're supposed to
Right.
lead from the front, and not that he's
He did. He did.
you know, making
He's
good
sort of
decisions,
tragic.
but at least his his sentiment is there. So
He's
Though
tragic in a
shoving,
lot of
you know,
ways.
I was going to say shoving people affected with COVID into nursing homes. They could have dialed that one back. I could have probably
He's
handled
what
that a
were
little
you
bit
saying,
better.
Holmes?
he was tragic, and Cuomo's tragic in a lot of ways. I mean, yeah, the whole like murder 20,000 old people in New York was probably not a good idea. But he seemed like he was a bit more adept and down to earth than Newsom. But Cuomo was thrown literally into the meat grinder for a sexual comment. I mean,
Yep.
did he even grope the
He's a
chick?
single guy. The Cuomo sexual, as we like to call him. A lot of women find him very attractive. Don't know why, but yeah, that's strange. Speaking to like a woman on the streets about it, like he's single. Like I don't understand what the people kind of flabbergasted on. Like that's what you brought him down on.
You know that Gavin had repeated sex with his best friend's wife, who was his secretary, while he was in office, and then he used state funds to pay her off. And this all came out a couple of years ago.
Oh yeah, and he's apologizing in a press
Nobody
conference.
cared. Yeah.
I think Cuomo wants to run again, from my understanding. I did see some talks about that.
Good for him.
But you see, Hochul wasn't elected. And I always tell everyone that she was not elected. How did she become governor of the state? And the first thing that she wanted to do was, you don't want to get vaccinated as a nurse? Well, we'll bring people in from the Philippines to do it.
What do you mean she wasn't elected? What? How's that happen?
When Cuomo stepped down, she took a hold, and then the Republican candidate, whose name starts with a Z and he's a JOO, I forgot his name.
Zeldin.
Yeah, Zeldin. He just rolled over, and a lot of people found that's harking back to what I said earlier before, that a lot of people feel that the election's a scam in New York, because everyone had Zeldin signs on their lawns and stuff and bumper stickers. I didn't see anything for Hochul whatsoever, yet Hochul pulled away with the win.
Well, I think it's revealing in all these stories just how important the apparatus of the party is, and if you are in favor with them and also useful to them in a sense that you're either going to be obedient or carry out what they want, you will get a slot, and that's not revealed to the voter for probably obvious reasons, but it is a huge dynamic that goes on in influencing the actual selection of who we're allowed to select or elect, supposedly, when we actually check a box.
I personally thought that Biden was going to win again. I'll be straight up with you, because after the 2020 election, I thought, that's it. You're never going to see a Republican again, and they're just going to run rogue shot over the country with, wokeism and open borders, et cetera, and the backlash. Like, I'll be straight up with you. Since Trump has taken office, man, I've been pulled over like 4 times. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? I would never get pulled over, and just had I'm like, God damn! I guess you guys are now enforcing the law since Trump was elected. I just don't understand how
there is
turned
a
on a
mood
dime.
shift. There is a mood shift. I think it's a good one, but
I hate bad drivers, so I'm glad you're getting pulled over, man.
Oh, dude, you gotta understand. I was just driving up on curbs. Like I knew the cops were not enforcing anything whatsoever.
Yeah, and
Dude, you don't
based on
understand. Let me
pictures
tell you,
I've seen of what your car looks like, that's even more hilarious.
Oh, my car's a disaster. But listen, you guys don't even know how bad the situation is regarding like the car situation in New York, because the NYPD stopped enforcing certain laws. As I noted, what's going on in Asheville, defund the police. You get into a car accident now, there's no point in exchanging information anymore because you're going to be waiting 4 or 5 hours for the cops to show up. So, I had one guy sideswipe
Do
me.
they just not? They don't show up to car crashes anymore. They
No,
just
they
don't
don't.
care.
Unless
Why?
there's like a body and there's a
But
911
when
call.
was the last time any of you called the police? I stopped doing that years ago. They don't do anything. Like they're useless. I mean,
Well, hold on. In a
they give
place like New
tickets.
York, you kind of, I don't know. I mean, that seems like you're so supposed to. Like that just seems like it's part of the city. I don't. How big is the NYPD? It's like 50,000
40,000. 40.
Oh my God, that's an army.
And keep in mind, LAPD I think is 15,000.
Yeah, I mean New York it's huge. And
well, they did that after the crime of the 70s and also the 90s. Basically, is when Giuliani did that, and Bloomberg continued it, and it brought businesses back, and it made sense.
Yeah, actually,
and 9/11 compounded it, but
Right.
that's why
Bloomberg might have been. I mean, might have been the greatest pro-white politician New York City's ever seen. I mean, that man presided over the hipster takeover.
Well,
of
he
Brooklyn.
actually used to ride the subway. Wasn't that his like big shtick? And he probably was like, you know what? I don't want to get stabbed. While I'm
he saw all these guys, all these black guys on the train, obviously carrying, and he's like, we got to put a stop to this. And that was when he unveiled
But despite Bloomberg's flaws and stuff, he did try his best to try to get on the level of average people. I'll give him
I mean,
that.
he was all right.
He gets such a bad rap. I mean, the people that hated, the hatred for him, from what I saw, was strictly from like that weird time post 2012 election where libertarianism briefly took over the Republican Party. And everybody hated Michael Bloomberg because of his soda bans, because that killed him. And everybody gave him shit. And in hindsight, like, this man presided over the greatest.
It's like what RFK is talking about now.
He presided over the greatest influx of intelligent white people into New York City in a generation. He like literally had a policy where if you
they all want to use his insider trading terminal.
If you looked mildly suspicious as a black person, he just told the cops, like, yeah, just like pull that guy over and like take his pants off and search him for whatever. I mean, the fact that people hated this guy in hindsight is so surreal to me. Like,
he was a nanny. He was like, I'm talking portion control. I don't want you drinking. Like, people really did not jive with that. When I lived in Phnom Penh, there was a monster billboard at a busy intersection about don't drink and drive, and it was the Bloomberg Foundation. I'm like, this fucking guy's all the way in Cambodia telling Cambodians not to drink and drive.
Oh man, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to respect there. I wish you. Yeah, I think that people hated him for no good reason. In hindsight, New York could use Michael Bloomberg again.
It makes some sense though, because think about it. It's like you've got an actual functioning city, and what do you do from there? You basically start twiddling with the margins, and eventually people are like, all right, do we really need hallway monitoring of what Pepsi Cola we're buying at the store? That's the mentality, and it's understandable because it's like everything's fine. Why do you have to make?
He wanted to tax the big
even
goal.
more
That's
annoying.
What was really the under. Listen, so here's the deal with Bloomberg. He weaponized a lot of these departments. He weaponized the DEP, the DOB, and started trying to figure out different ways to bring in more tax revenue.
We don't live there. What's DEP, DOP?
Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Buildings, Department of DOF, Department of Finance. So he weaponized all these.
Okay, but there's like no industry in New York, so why do you need maybe like on the side, like
The
Manhattan
city's
doesn't have any
broke.
factories.
It's always broke,
so.
man. The city. I think when he first took office, the Department of Education was in a deficit, and he put his own money into to pull it out of a deficit. And he's like, I'm not going to keep throwing my money at your problems. So he started figuring out different ways and kind of nuanced ways on how to bring in more tax revenue. And the cherry on top was the taxing of the big gulp.
Right. And okay, so what I was trying to, let me just finish my point. So
Yeah, go on.
you get that as sort of why people are like, all right, come on, man, this is too much. But what they don't understand, and I'm not necessarily blaming anyone for this, but what they don't really anticipate is taking an actually nice city and turning it into what it's become. And you probably would have less of that if you had guys like him. And I'm not even like some huge Bloomberg fan, but I'm just trying to be realistic about this, because you do need actual like good people, good governance in places like this. And one thing I always liked about him was that he would have this, yes, it's a businessman's point of view, but it actually was a somewhat reasonable way to manage things. Like if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Like that's a saying. But he would always say, you know, in God we trust, but all others bring data. And it's a way of actually forcing people to show evidence for their arguments, as opposed to just using emotional appeals and things like that. It's a technocratic way of approaching things. He's a technocrat, essentially.
Right, he's a man devoid of emotions.
Right, and that's why he doesn't have the populist appeal of like a Donald Trump or somebody like that, or even a Giuliani, frankly. But they're more emotive types. They're more man of the people types that, ironically, Bloomberg was doing his best to become, but he really wasn't. I mean, he was a kind of a Wall Street guy that got rich by
Also not politically aligned, so he'd always kind of sway in the breeze. I'm a Republican. No, I'm independent. I'm a Democrat. Like he just went whatever the which way the public was blowing is, so he never was really politically aligned with anyone.
He did pretty well for himself until he wasted $1 billion trying to become president. That was probably his worst financial move. But
even De Blasio. So the question is like, why would they do that? And my theory is they do it thinking they're trying to. It's a resume builder to try to get into something else. I mean, De Blasio even contemplating running for presidency was ludicrous, but
he's
there
not
was some type
popular
of
enough.
motivation. Well, we know that, but the thing is it's him basically at a job interview for something else. I don't know what De Blasio's doing now. I know people throw shit at him when they see him in the street, but I thought that was interesting.
In any case, we've run the gamut. We've talked about the hurricanes, the fires, the corrupt political machinery of the United States. Where do we go from here, gentlemen? What is more to be said? What do you guys think the next 4 years are going to be like? With the new Trump and Reich, whatever it's called.
Well, I'll put it to you guys. What do you think of which way things might blow under the Trump administration?
I mean, so far so good, man. I'm happy with what I'm seeing. We'll see if it continues, but it's a lot better than the last time around.
I don't really feel like getting pulled over anymore, dude.
Look, someone's getting.
Look, we've got the Marine Corps on the
yeah.
southern border. I mean, how could I be upset about that? Like that's what we've been needing for 30 years. So. Thank God.
I don't have much to say. I appreciate what's happening. I'm looking forward to taking Greenland. And that's really
renaming Gulf of Mexico.
We could skip Canada, but yeah,
Greenland is really all I'm interested in. So if we get Greenland, then I consider this a big success. And that's all I really have to say. That's my number one priority is Greenland, to be honest.
Population 50,000 or some obscene.
Soon to be 50,001, my friend. As soon as it's ours.
Can you get a second home out there?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I already got my eye on a few spots there.
No, it was fun. It was fun chatting with the both of you. I had a blast.
Of course. Yeah. You'll have to come
thanks
back
for coming. Yeah, I hope your mom makes it through this. It sounds like you had her
Just
prepped up for the.
short-term boomerism, bro. I'm like, yo, everyone's up here. What are you doing down there? All right, you're gonna live forever. You know what I mean? That's. And I know I think everyone bashes boomers to no end, but there's a lot to be said about them for sure. And she's no exception.
They continue to marvel me and how disconnected they are, and seemingly suffer no consequences because of it. Um, Although, I don't think your mom was responsible for this, but yeah, it's she's still there. I thought you said she's
Yo, she's
thinking of
contemplating
getting
moving
out.
back. She's 75, man. There's like no one
Yeah.
down there to look after her. It makes me worry about giving her age now.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
it's like, what are you doing down there? So it's like you're gonna move back, sell everything, and get a small apartment here because that's all you can afford now. I mean, no intentions of ever relocating to Asheville in the